Okay, so I'd like to call our meeting to order. It's the budget hearings Tuesday, April 30th at approximately 1:02 p.m. Where we left off last week was with community services. My intent is to pick up with community services. No, thank you. Pick up with community services and then would hopefully conclude that. And then I'd like to go back to Parks and Recreation so that we can report on the subcommittee hearings findings this morning and hopefully wrap that up. And then pick up with tourism. If we can get through that, then that would catch us up to where we should be today, which would be Public Works and then Public Utilities. We had scheduled 2 hours for Public Works, Public Utilities. So we'll just see what time does the committee want to go to 5 o'clock today, or what is the? You want to go to midnight as the mayor suggests, or so 5 o'clock? Okay, so can I have a roll call, please? Here. Yeah, he's on his way. She's here. Okay, so given my remarks regarding the agenda, do we have approval for the agenda, a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, so community services. I'm going to remind us, I'm going to turn to page 5 of the budget book, summary by category. When we look at community services, we're only seeing a 1.5% increase overall in the budget overall. Salaries, wages, and benefits, it's up a little bit, 5.5%. Contractuals and utilities, though, there's a reduction of 5.6%. So do we want to talk about that a little bit? Again, and we probably covered some of this last time, but the reduction in contractuals and utilities. Can you give us a brief explanation as to what that reduction is, and is that indeed something that you're recommending and you're okay with?
Thank you, Chairman, councilors. That reduction does represent primarily the transfer of the law enforcement assisted diversion program out of our department and into the fire department. Into NEHO, and that explains the largest bulk of that.
Okay, and then repairs and maintenance, it's only $866, so I don't know if there's, that's
I think it's
minor.
Pretty insignificant for us.
Okay, supplies, you're up maybe $3,600. Is there a reason for that?
Counselor, the chairman, counselors, we're looking to really bolster some of our after school and summer programs, especially the activities of the arts activities that we're able to do with the children. Some of that is attributable to that. And I think just probably a more realistic overall appraisal per division of what they've been using and needing.
Okay, insurance is down a little bit. That's probably self-explanatory. Other operating costs, you're up by $13,431. Do you know what's causing that increase?
Chairman, that's just an adjustment from this year, what we've actually been doing, I think, to what we would anticipate next year. Do you have any more information about that, Edith? We had worked, Chairman, with our budget analyst to make some adjustments based on actual spending this year, and that represented.
Okay, it's a minor increase, and then transfers to other funds, $67,364. What's that?
So, Chairman, councilors, that represents the money we pay out to support the support we get from other departments, so fleet, IT primarily.
Okay. So those are that's the budget as far as the actual numbers, the expenses that are being proposed. Are there any questions from the committees regarding those funds and those numbers we went over? And then I'll allow discussion for general topics afterwards, but I really want to, one thing that I observed and I contemplated over the weekend from last week's budget hearings was an exchange between Councillor Harris and our finance director, Ms. McCoy, and then Romero Worth chimed in a little bit, and it was about a missing amount from Parks and Rec. And I thought the exchange it was actually pretty good because Councillor Harris, that was something big that was missing. And Ms. McCoy, but you were right also in the response that was, well, that's why we're here. And it dawned on me that is why we're here. I mean, that's a big mistake, granted, but maybe we need to focus a little more on the numbers first, and then, if time permits, get into kind of the general discussions and policies regarding each department, because that's actually more critical in my mind as a finance committee. If we miss those things, and doesn't, we really can't do much, or we can follow up with the policy discussion or the issues related to policy and the way departments are run, but I don't want to miss those numbers. So I plan on focusing on those numbers first, asking if there's specific questions from the committee on those numbers, and then if we could come to a general agreement on that, then if time permits, we could get into the other discussion. So in regards to salaries, contractuals, utilities, repairs and maintenance, supplies, insurance, other operating costs, capital purchases, and transfers, are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Harris.
So other than what you've already reviewed, correct?
Yes.
One thing we talked about late last week is the mentorship program. And this is a new program, and the reason I put it out there is because it's a new program, it's a new initiative, and increasingly I feel my role, and I think other committee members share the same view, that how many new programs can we do? Are we covering our old programs well enough? And so, I heard kind of a mixed message having to do with Inspire, and that this mentorship program, and the mayor provided an anecdote, and others spoke to it. Certainly there's real value here, but in fact, I'm just wondering, and I didn't want to say only $25,000, because $25,000 is real money, but it's a new program that's not well defined, and I wondered if really now is the time to initiate a new program. Do you have a response on that, Ms. Ochoa?
Chairman, Councillor Harris, I think that there may be a new spin in the framing of this as mentorship, but I think it relates to longstanding priorities of the department in terms of connecting youth to job opportunities and educational opportunities, and that mentorship is a good sort of way to describe some of those efforts. It is a new program, and frankly, I have to learn more about it, but I think that it's something that the community has been doing in one form or another for a long time. It's part of what I'm seeking to do is standardize and bring into the fold, if you will, some of these initiatives that are really wonderful, that are just springing up all over our community, but the city and the Community Services Department may need to act a little more strongly as a hub for some of the work for it to be effective.
Yeah, I think of literacy volunteers, and there's any number of groups that have been around for a long time. They do a tremendous amount, and it all falls under the heading of volunteerism. And I think unless there's a real definition and a real justification, and it seems like we're doing versions of this perhaps elsewhere, but until it's clear what we're doing and what this may mean in terms of added value, I would question whether we need to start a new program right now. So that's my opinion on that. I also, something else we talked about, not around your department, but this was around Parks and Recreation, and it had to do with an after-school program, and particularly Chairman Abeta wondered about, and after a series of questionings, it was determined there was 35 people, $50 a month or $50 a week per child, those types of things. But we didn't really break out the true costs of that program in terms of salary and benefits and transit and the other things like that. But you also spoke just a few minutes ago or referenced after-school programs within community services. Maybe we should have a little bit better quickly understand what community services is involved in, and if in fact, not quite frankly, it would be not dialing down the programs that you started, but wondering, do we need to dial back on the Parks and Recreation program?
Chairman, Councilors, Councilor Harris, thank you for the question. One thing that's really exciting to me this year is that Director Munoz and I and his staff and my staff have been sitting down and coordinating between the two programs more than ever before. And I think that there's a real desire to make sure that if the city is offering an after-school and summer program to the children of the city, that it's one program. And it doesn't really matter at, whether it's at GCC or at Driscoll or at Monica Roybal. Maybe there's a way to standardize and create one sliding scale so that there's one program and that the best of each part of the program comes together. Because I think that Melissa Bustos at GCC and John's staff run a tremendous program at GCC. They've been very generous this year with having our kids use the GCC, which has not always been the case in the past. There's been sort of this strange artificial division between the two programs. So our plan is actually to sit down with the two programs and create one program. As far as the community knows, there's no reason to click one button for this or that. The programs both include not only recreational activities, but field trips and tutoring and after-school homework support. And it should be one program. So we are in agreement about that in terms of what that means for the numbers and how we allocate across. I'll just say that we're committed to collaboration and primarily to making it work for the families in Santa Fe. A lot of it has to do with where people live or work, where they want to take their children. Not every person who brings their children to our programs and community services can afford the GCC, but if we collaborate and integrate, we might be able to set up a sliding scale system that is beneficial to both programs and be able to benefit from the fact that we have a little more staff, we have more transportation capability, they have a pool, an ice skating rink, a golf course, and but it's not really us and them, it's us together. So I hope that answers your question.
Councilor Harris, on that point, I'm inclined, I would like to approve both budgets, but I want to start the discussions immediately about what we do long-term with both programs.
Chairman,
Thank you.
Councilors, thank you.
Councilor
The other
Harris,
thing
for
we're
bringing
doing,
that up.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I was just going to thank Councilor Harris for bringing it up. I think what you just said is good enough for me. I think that we need to bring the two programs together. I don't think right now is the place to do it, but I think we should work on that over the next year, and then next budget cycle have one after-school program.
Thank
Maybe
you,
it's in
Chairman.
multiple places.
Thank you, Councilors.
but
It's a goal for sure. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that we will be doing, and it probably have to be early next fiscal year, a plan around after-school and summer programs. We've started to gather information from the schools on the array of programs in the community, and what should the city's program be in comparison with everything else. So we'll certainly, that's a big priority for the coming year.
Well, I agree, and I just wanted to say you gave the right answer as far as I'm concerned on the after-school.
Councilor Lindell.
How many after-school kids are in the program at Monica Roybal?
150 in the after-school program, Chairman, Councilor Lindell.
Okay, so there's 150 in that program and 35 in the program at GCC.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Romero-Worth.
I just wanted to bring up a topic that's not mentioned here, but we heard last night at Finance, the Food Policy Council was here, wanting money for their operations. Apparently it doesn't fit in really with the new direction that's being outlined. I guess I sort of wanted to hear from you what your thoughts are on that. It was sort of, I've been struggling with this since last night about why they came to Finance, how our process is or isn't working, and I don't know. Maybe you can help. And I'm not sure we got all the information. I heard subsequent to that presentation, they referenced some sort of resolution that required the city and the county to share the program costs. And then I heard later that the resolution had expired. And so maybe you can help give us some context about that presentation and what's going on.
Chairman, Councilors, Councilor Romero-Worth, thank you for the question. So I'll start by saying the work of the Food Policy Council is very important, and I think that they do very good work. They are looking at both food security, which is a huge concern for us in community services, as well as agricultural food policy countywide, and they've done some tremendous work. And we did a little research, and Julie Sanchez, who's here, can answer any more detailed questions. But you're correct in that there was a resolution that has expired that did dictate that the city and the county would contribute to the coordination of the council. So we don't have a formal agreement right now around that, and that may be why they decided to come directly to Finance, although I had been working with them closely since I took the position in October to ensure that we could find a way to support their work. It's not appropriate, nor it's never been appropriate, really, for their work to be paid out of the Human Services Committee, which is primarily, as you know, for safety net services, direct services. So that was never a good fit, and because our department doesn't have a tremendous amount of flexible funding for community organizations, we started to think about other ways of doing it. I approached, also in the spirit of collaboration, Director Brown of the Economic Development Department, because his work intersects with some of their work, and we discussed possibly pursuing a sole source contract to support coordination in the Food Policy Council. We were very committed. Gino Rinaldi, Senior Services Division Director, who's able to be with us here today, sits on that council and regularly contributes. So I think it's just a matter of logistics in terms of figuring out the best way to support some of their work. Historically, speaking of numbers, we've done so at the level of $10,000, and that's the level we were prepared, both from my budget and from Director Brown's budget, to look at a sole source, and because there really is no other entity in the community that does the kind of work they do.
So then what I hear you saying is that you're working on figuring out where they fit and how best to get an appropriate level of funding to them. So maybe we don't need to be concerned with that right at the moment. It's in good hands.
Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to answer your question about how they ended up presenting at various committees, is because they had asked if they could present the update to the food assessment, and just to give you a background of their organization and the work they've done, especially with new counselors. So it wasn't really, it ended up coming at the same time as budget hearings, which wasn't what we were intending. It was supposed to be a long time ago, but they were left off of the agenda, I think last month. And so it worked out, but it was more to present on that food assessment update that they gave us a hard copy, and just so you all know what they do. So hopefully we can work it out. And
Okay, that's helpful, Mr. Chair and Councilor Villarreal, because it did seem sort of like an end run, and maybe a bad precedent.
Yeah.
So,
That wasn't the
that's-
intention, but it ended
yeah.
up
And
that way.
yeah, I mean, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
The one question I had the last time, and see if I can frame this. So we were talking last week about the moving forward with the Southside Center, Teen Center, and what comes with that, and that means our staff will be part of that project, and it'll require staff to staff it and maintain, et cetera. So I think that's a great, we're going in that direction. What concerns me is that we have Monica Roybal Center and also the Carlos Ortega's Teen Center that are having maintenance issues and falling apart. So I guess my question is what is the plan, if there's a capital improvements plan for our existing facilities, or are we thinking long-term about how we could utilize those facilities in a different way? And I was curious if you all had, now that we're moving forward and the majority of the students and youth that we work with they live in the south side of town, what do you think would be the optimal use of these two centers, considering the need for major upgrades? And maybe you could speak to some of those upgrades that are needed as well. So just a kind of array, like existing conditions and what do you see into the future with those facilities and as they relate to youth programming?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, thank you for the question. I think we did put in for a capital request on the Monica Roybal playground surface. Other than that, we don't have major repairs at Monica Roybal. The plumbing got taken. Let's let Edith answer this. She knows that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, so as of today, the plumbing situation did get taken care of at the Monica Roybal. The Carlos Ortega Teen Center has no repairs. Last year, we were able to upgrade the fire suppression system along with a kitchen renovation. So the only main issue we had or have, and we've been working with Public Works and Capital Outlay, is to get the blacktop or the basketball courts resurfaced, and we did submit the documentation so that we can get that on the next list.
That said, though, I think your question is important because it goes to what I mentioned about doing a plan for the needs around after-school and summer programs in the city as a whole. That should include a mapping of where people need to have their children most conveniently to where they live and or work or where children go to school. So as part of that planning process, which we will embark in this coming fiscal year, we hope to have, before we prepare our fiscal 21 budget request, better data on how we're going to need to staff, hopefully what will be a partially stood up teen center in fiscal year 21, and what are the proper uses for Monica Roybal and Carlos Ortega. We're open to what the data will show us in terms of what families need, and that said, we do love those buildings, and we wanted you to know they're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
And so I think that remains to be seen.
As long as we see that as an asset and we think about the potential as it relates to youth, because that was the whole intention.
Yes.
So when is the asset mapping going to take place?
It'll take place in the first half of next fiscal year.
Thank you. And then the other question I had to do with the foster grandparent program. I know the last, I think it was in Public Works, that we adjusted some funding source to another line item. And so I was curious if there was a reason or a way that we could foster that program or need more support for it. And maybe you could just describe what's been happening, if there's a drop-off and the reasons why you see there's a drop-off in participation, and if we should be moving money away from that, or if we should just start looking at other ways to develop that program.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I'll defer to Mr. Rinaldi.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal. And with that fact, the other members of the council, the foster grandparent program is a program that originated with the federal government with the Senior Corp. It's the National Senior Corporation for Volunteer Services. And they've developed the foster grandparent program, the senior companions, and the retired senior volunteer programs, or as we like to refer to it, RSVP, or shorten it up. And the foster grandparent program works with at-risk youth in the schools. And it is a program for individuals who are 55 and older, and they have to be of low income. And so what we get is we get a grant from the federal government as well as from the state, and then we also put additional dollar in there from the city, and that's what funds the program. The criteria is pretty strict with regards to the income, and what we're finding is that at times it's difficult to find individuals who are certified or qualified income-based. Also, working in the school system is not what it used to be. It's a little more difficult. So the combination of both makes it sometimes a little difficult to find enough folks at the time. But it's an ongoing thing. The other part to it is, in order to receive the federal and state money, you have to be sanctioned by the federal government to be the provider, or the for the county, and we are for the county. So that's the program itself. The move we did was sort of an internal shifting of funding. We may wind up looking at making that a more permanent one. Was we moved the money from the foster grandparent into the retired senior volunteer program, which we have been holding back on giving stipends to seniors because we just didn't have the revenues in that program. So it allows that flexibility for moving it to where it is, but it doesn't mean that we're going to stop, because the senior companion program, which is a senior, will go into the home of somebody who is really elderly and more homebound, also requires the individuals to be of low income. So it's a continual recruiting process.
Do you feel the funding is appropriate that you have? Okay, thank you. Councillor Harris.
Well, just on the point earlier I think another option as we get to look at the assets is Carlos Ortega. I'm just going to use that as an example. Since we haven't put any money in, I'm assuming that the list is a long one in terms of what needs to happen. I think always one option as we evaluate is to dispose of the asset. I think we need to consider at some point potentially selling that asset, as well as other assets. So I just want to make that point.
Okay, Councillor Villarreal, did you have more questions?
Not at this time. I guess to close off the foster grandparent program, if there's a way, I just think it has a lot greater potential, maybe because I feel like the need for intergenerational integration and mentoring is so crucial for our community. And so ways to boost that, I think, is important. And to utilize our community resources, whether it's nonprofit groups or trying to really get the school district more engaged in it, maybe there's a way to increase the potential for really creating a robust program than it is now.
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, maybe we can look at the seed money from the mentoring program and see about building programs that work for us and our community first. Of course, we have federal dollars, and we have to adhere to those strictures, but when we have a little more flexible funding, we can sometimes tailor our programs appropriately, whether it's the $25,000 that we've requested as seed money, or perhaps foundation money that we might pull in. I think this is a community that definitely recognizes the importance of relationships between grandparents or seniors and younger people, and we can work to grow all of that.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Vihil-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the discussion we had last week about the workload of the Parks and Recreation Department, I'm very concerned about the workload of this department. And I know that you have maybe 23 committees to staff, and you also are perhaps going to get another one, the Women's Commission, that I realize has a finite end date, but no staff. And I'm wondering, and I didn't see any discussion, and we don't have any data about any FTEs being requested. Do you have, did you request any staff?
Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Koppler, we did not request new staff except for the navigator that I mentioned last week that will be housed in the Senior Services Division. I have to correct myself. I misspoke when I said that we have 23 committees in the department. I think maybe I felt like we had 23. We have 13, and we do participate in a number up to 10 in the community. But in terms of staffing capacity, we staff 13 boards, commissions, and task forces, and the task forces they time out. It is a challenge for us, but I do think before I requested new FTEs, I wanted to see if the restructure that I'm working on in terms of the councils and the committees will help make them more impactful and more efficient in terms of staff time. I think we'll be okay. We tend to be able to muster our resources to do what we need to do. I really appreciate your concern. You might be right, but maybe we could look at it next year. I think we're going to manage with great staff we have. We have one position that we haven't hired yet, senior planner position, that will certainly help staff. And I think we're also restructuring in the after-school and summer programs so that our Youth and Family Services Division Director's over that, and that's his primary focus. So Edith Martinez will actually, I'm going to be inviting her to staff the Women's Commission, assuming the Women's Commission runs forward. She has extensive knowledge of, the HR, finance issues in the city, and I think she'd be a great staff person, and hopefully that won't overburden her because she'll have extra time. But we'll get back to you maybe. If it's too much, maybe we could make an adjustment. Thank you.
Okay. The other with regard to committees, I think it's important to, in the future, when new committees are created, that we do, in the FIR, place on their staff time. We've done that in the recent resolution for the Veterans Banners, which I was astounded. But it wouldn't be a bad idea with new committees to really see what staff time it's going to entail and what those unrealized cash commitments are. The other comment about committees in your department is that it's all good to take on all this workload and be the champion for no new staff and get kudos, but the employees realize that they're being overworked, and sooner or later they're going to go somewhere else where it's not so demanding without any real time off. And so I just caution about that. The other question I have is, last year at these committee meetings, there was a great public outcry for opening the Lafarge Library on Sundays. So I was just wondering about the usage. Was that a good decision? And should it be continued? And I just kind of want to know how that's going.
Chairman, Councilor Vihel-Koppler, I'll defer to Jeff Donlin.
Not yet.
Give him some time there.
Well, councilors, I don't have those numbers with me. So anecdotally, use on Sundays at Lafarge is relatively light, but I don't have those numbers right in front of me. I absolutely can get them to you, but
I don't really need numbers. I just wondered, how it was going now. Even though it's relatively light, I think the outcry was that there are many students in District 4 and around who don't have access to internet, and that was a great help for them to do their homework and such. And so that's still really important.
Well, I think so. I think that it's one of those decisions that doesn't have to be based purely on numbers. I mean, it's like you're providing, the library service is a pretty important, open, free public service that we provide. And the small cost to open another one on Sundays.
And isn't it reduced hours, or is it all day?
No, it's 4 hours. So each branch is open 4 hours on Sunday afternoon.
All right, thank you all.
Is there a motion regarding the Community Services Department budget? Sure.
Thank you. No one pushes that button like you, Mayor. I'd like those, I would like to see those numbers. Could you email them to all of us, please? Thank you.
Okay, is there a motion regarding the Community Services Department budget?
Yeah, I'm prepared to make a motion, but I also, and I don't want to spend time with it now, but I submitted some questions for community services to you on Sunday, Ms. McCoy. Did that get forwarded to Ms. Ochoa?
Chair, councilors, I think we forwarded what we got. I'll have to go back and look and see, but we've been trying. Kira's saying no, so maybe they didn't get forwarded to her. Whatever you asked, I'll make sure it's forwarded to her and we can get answers.
Okay, that'd be good. I don't want to take any more time right now, but I would like to see answers to those questions and they get distributed to everybody. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the Community Services Department budget less the $25,000 for the mentorship program.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Discussion on the $25,000? Is that the discussion, Councilor Lindell? Okay.
And I'll simply say, I mean, it gets pointed up different ways, including Councilor Villarreal's question about the foster grandparents, which is kind of essentially a mentoring program, and the struggles to find qualified participants. I just think we need, before we start a new program, we need to see what we're doing now, what's working. Then I heard it characterized as seed money. Seed money for what? So I just don't think, again, this just gets into my continued questioning of new programs. Are they well defined? Do we know what they're about? Is there overlap with other existing programs? And that's, certainly there's nothing. I think we all understand the value of mentorship in whatever form it comes. I referenced the literacy volunteers, but I just don't think we're quite ready for this one.
On that, is that something that perhaps you can start developing the plan, work on the plan, bring us the plan at either a quarter report or even mid-year and say, okay, we have a plan. Maybe we'll have $25,000 identified at that point, and it's something we could implement at mid-year, perhaps.
Chairman, councilors, that's fine. We can do that.
Councilor Lindell, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're giving them the green light to start the planning, but we're just not going to approve the funding right now for it.
So are we going to set that funding aside?
I think we would. I would say we don't. I think we just identify it at mid-year if if revenues are doing better than projected. We might be able to come up with the 25 at mid-year.
With what you said and Ms. McCoy going like this, yeah, I get the answer to that. And no, I don't have any comment on it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the motion is to approve the budget without the 25,000. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, so now we're going to move on back to the Parks and Recreation Department budget. And we postponed the Parks and Recreation Department budget because Councilor Harris had actually identified budget line item on page 25 of our spreadsheets that showed $217,000 that weren't included in the proposed budget. So what we did is we postponed. We had a subcommittee hearing this morning, and Mr. Munoz, as the chair of finance, I need to personally apologize to you. You should have been included in that meeting this morning. That was my bad as the chair. Mayor, I apologize to you also. I wouldn't have appreciated not being invited to a discussion like that about a department I was in charge of, so I apologize. But on the plus, we may have identified not just $217,000 for you, but Councilor Harris had talked about 320. I think Ms. McCoy identified $325,000, and I believe we're going to take that from the land use department budget. There was monies available for the code rewrite. If we do that in phases as opposed to all in 1 year, we could use the money from there. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, and then with that, Councilor Lindell, this morning you had raised some concerns about potential maintenance issues. Do you want to
Mr.
raise
Chair,
those now?
before we go on to maintenance, because I wasn't in the meeting, because I think I considered going, but then we would have had a quorum. What is this about? We're taking from which code rewrite?
The land use department proposed, I believe, close to $600,000 in their budget to do the Chapter 14 rewrite. Now, in discussions with the land use director, we said, can you spend that $600,000 all in 1 year, and will you get the code rewrite done in 1 year? She said, well, no, actually, we can't. It'll probably take 3 years, and I don't need all $600,000.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful because I do think that code rewrite is very important.
Yes, and she is.
So I don't want to be sacrificing that.
No, not at all. In fact, there's going to be money in the budget to start the code rewrite.
Okay.
Above and beyond what she got last year.
Okay,
and
thank
it's
you.
gonna start.
I just needed that background.
Councilor Lindell, did you have questions about other maintenance?
And thank you for asking that, Councilor Romero-Worth. It was definitely discussed. I had a concern because this comes up with me because I sit on the, and I have for years sat on the Oversight Committee for the MRC. And we just put a very, very sizable amount of money into the fields out there. And I don't know over time how we address some of the really, really sizable costs that we're facing there. Maybe it comes out of the capital budget. One thing I have in mind for sure is that we need a minimum of approximately $250,000 for irrigation repair. We have a very, very valuable asset in numerous ways out there. The golf course certainly, it's 2 golf courses actually, and it's super dependent on irrigation. So the other thing is with the sports complex request, like I said, I know this from sitting on the MRC committee, requests for between the sports complex and the softball fields about $75,000 for some maintenance things that I really think that they operate on a pretty tight budget, and I just hate for us to take any risk with those assets. So I don't know, Ms. McCoy, if you were able to identify anywhere that we might come up with an additional $75,000 to address those. You know, with the irrigation thing, I just told the quick story that years ago when I sat on that committee, they called everybody on the committee and asked if we could come out and stand with a hose and water greens, because that's how fast they were drying out and potentially losing them. And I think to lose one green out there, I don't know what it costs, but I know it would cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, to replace it. So I don't think it's a good place for us to get risky.
Mr. Munoz, do you want to address the committee regarding that first, though? Give you the opportunity to talk about that and the maintenance issues and kind of what you're dealing with out there.
Mr. Chair, City Councilors, Councilor Lindell, so in regard to maintenance, yeah, that is an important function at the MRC. So we know the irrigation system is aged, and there are some issues with the sprinkler heads. So what we're doing to work through that currently, as an example, we do have or have had an irrigation head audit, and we're trying to optimize those. Like, for example, recent work we've done on the greens, we have improved our watering by 14%. And so we'll work through that. But there are other issues also with the rest of the fields. So as an example, so the baseball fields and soccer fields that we're working on, Councilor Lindell mentioned is the need for top dressing and also turf work, which would be aeration, would be fertilization, and other items like that to keep those fields in good shape.
I don't expect you to say we don't need $75,000 in addition, but are these covered in other areas, or do we need to consider the $75,000? I mean, I don't want to give you an extra 75 if it's not covered somewhere else in the budget, I guess, is what's more correct.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so I'm trying to understand the question.
So Councilor Lindell is concerned that you don't have enough money in certain line items in your budget to address these issues. Is that indeed the case?
Right. Definitely, this would be helpful. It does pain me that we have to move monies around. I mean, obviously, other departments have needs as well.
Okay, and
but these are
and what you're proposing, Councilor Lindell, is to not move monies around within his department. It's to identify monies from somewhere else to put into your budget. So, Ms. McCoy, could we find $75,000, and where would we get it from?
Mr. Chairman, what I would propose to the Finance Committee is to decrease the land use budget by not just the $325,000 that was identified for the Parks Division increase, but additional to that, an additional $75,000 from the same funding source. It is general fund funding source as well. So it'd be decreasing the land use budget by $400,000, not the originally identified $325,000, to address both the Parks Division issue and the MRC issue that Councilor Lindell raised.
And with that would leave her $200,000 to get the code rewrite started.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
So she was proposing it in 3 phases anyways, which would be $200,000 a year potentially. So that could work and not hurt land.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, that is correct. There is significant staff time that will also be dedicated to this multi-phase plan for the code update, and I think this slower approach would be prudent as well for the land use code update.
Okay, Councilor Romero-Worth, you have a concerned look on in your eyes.
Sorry, I have a dog at the vet, so that's part of my it's part of my concerned look. But I don't know whether this is appropriate at this moment, but I would like to know, this $325,000 that was identified is going to what? Is that to do the more weed work, or
the gopher trappings, the assisted arterials and collector medians, because again, those were left out of the budget.
Okay, so that we talked about last time. Okay. Yeah, that's, sorry, flying candy. That's was my question.
Councilor Lindell.
Yeah, so let's see if we can get creative with numbers here. I don't really like to whack Carol for all of this. How about that 25 that we just took out of the other budget for mentoring? Could that go toward this?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, I'll have to check on the funding source. I believe that was general fund, so yes, that would be appropriate.
It was general fund, yes. So
Thank you for suggesting that, Mayor.
Okay, but you're going to be 50,000 short still, or do you just want to start with 25?
No, I mean, I'll take the other 50, but I didn't want to, you know,
okay,
it's like
so
we're playing cards here. One other thing I did want to bring up was the wastewater situation, and we talked about that some this morning. I think that the MRC was looking for like $400,000 worth of wastewater. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, councilors, Councilor Lindell, yeah, that's definitely something that we're looking at and working with water on future plans to work with affluent water and make that more efficient.
Yeah, I would hope that we would find a way to do that without wastewater sending a bill over to the MRC for $400,000 for that. That doesn't make much sense to me that we would do that. I think there's certainly the country club gets a massive amount of effluent from the city. I don't know why the city wouldn't give the city a reasonable amount of effluent. So let's look into that and try to get that straightened out.
Okay, so we resolved the primary issues as to why this budget was postponed. Councilor Harris, did you have any other items that you wanted to discuss briefly before we call for a motion?
Thank you, Chair. Not too much, but you know, I was advocating for increased funding, and I'm pleased that we're going to be able to find that. But really, the flip side of that story is what I thought I heard is we've expended all of this year's money for contract services, so that we don't really have the monies available. We know we have heavy rains even today. Weeds are coming up, and so we're short this year. So, quite frankly, that's a managerial issue that concerns me, Mr. Munoz. Why that wasn't identified, brought back through whatever the appropriate channels are, city manager, finance department, then on to us to find some money to address that. Which you still have a problem, by the way. I mean, you still have the problem in the current year. So it's a note of caution in terms of, and I know you're working on a reorganization and other things, but that shouldn't stand in the way of certain basic steps that you have to make as department director. Okay? Just wanted to say that. And also, didn't know what the plan was, if there was money in this budget for Las Saleras, our new regional park that we never talk about. And I know that we haven't fully accepted it yet, but build out is 25 acres with a lot of facilities. We're not there yet. Phase 1's in essentially there, not accepted yet. But do you have money to address Las Saleras in the coming year?
Mr. Chair, councilors, Councilor Harris, we'll take a look at that. We did submit a list of CIP proposals working with the Public Works team. I know that there are some issues around Las Saleras.
Right.
As far as a prioritization, we prioritized other parks, like the Railyard, Pueblos del Sol, and other parks like that. But I'll take a look at that to answer your question specifically.
Okay. All right, and there's just one more thing. We had a lengthy discussion, and it's going to continue for the rest of this year and on to next year, and that's safety. You remember what we talked about the other day, and the exposure that I believe Parks and Recreation have, just the nature of your work and the activities that you're involved in. So I would not give you a mandate for developing a safety program. You said you were consolidating, but I hope that we could have a first pass anyways, a rough draft in, say, 90 days.
Chair, Councilor Harris, that's very reasonable. We've started that.
Thank you, Mr. Munoz. I
Hey,
appreciate that.
is there a motion regarding Parks and Recreation?
I'll move to approve an amended Parks and Rec budget that funds service contracts, is how it's referenced, for $325,000, and then $75,000 for the activities identified by Councilor Lindell, and the funding source would be primarily. $375,000 from land use and the line item that's been identified, as well as then $25,000 that just came out of the community services budget.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Munoz.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to our tourism department. And if you turn to page 4 of the packet of information, the tourism budget is up by approximately 16%. 7.3 is attributed to salaries and wages. 223.5% in capital purchases, 11% in debt service, and 19.5% in supplies. So, Mr. Randall, can you go over those items with us and explain the differences between this year and last year?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. The Tourism Department has two divisions, the Visit Santa Fe, which is the sales and marketing component, and the Community Convention Center. Significant increases in Visit Santa Fe are in the advertising line is the primary place where there's a $300,000 increase this year. The combined advertising, and it's actually split between the two divisions, with the lion's share of it being in Visit Santa Fe, but there's a portion that's in the Community Convention Center. The total of those two this year was $1,250,000, and in the proposed budget it'll be $1,550,000. So that's the $300,000 increase in advertising. The other significant increases are in a couple of one-time capital programs that consist of changing the 4 water-chilled units that cool the convention center to 4 air-cooled units. They actually were not plumbed properly from the start. There was no method for exchanging the water on the frequency that is required for a water-cooled type unit. And as a result, we've not been able to change out the water, and it gets to be heavy, and it has heavier chemicals in it, and has caused the units to actually wear out earlier than they should have. So without a drain proposed, and actually for quite a few years they were flushing them on a daily basis almost, it's required, and we got fined for putting this water into the surface water. So we can't just run it off the roof like was being done for several years. So that's $450,000 to convert those units. There's another $600,000 that will be used to construct additional storage behind the convention center going out towards Federal Place where the dog is located. There'll be about a 10-foot buffer left where we can put some sculpture. Originally that area was planted with trees. They've all left us, and there's just 1 or 2 left. It was kind of a bad scheme because there's not a whole lot of soil there. It's on top of the garage, and the wrong things were put in there. So this space will allow us to add some very needed storage that we have. Over the last 5 years, we've been able to significantly increase the amount of equipment we keep on site that we can rent that's frequently used, that we can make available to our customers, and we need this space for storage. And then there's an additional $400,000 in a capital program that would be to rework the second floor terrace of the convention center that's currently only accessed through the elevator coming up with the community building. The idea is to extend the coverage of that terrace. Right now it's about the part that is covered is just 2/3 covered. We're going to carry that coverage out to the perimeter of the terrace. We'll remove some of the planters that are on the terrace that go over toward the bell tower elevator that makes the terrace fairly unusable in that area, and we'll put in a stairwell that would allow people to move between the courtyard and the outdoor terrace, which will make it far more usable. The ADA concern would still be covered by the elevator access through the community building. So it's a relatively easy way to make that significant asset a lot more usable for us, for our customers. Be able to do a reception up on the terrace, move down to perhaps a dinner in the courtyard, or down to and come back into the convention center for those purposes. So those are the primary, the major components of the budget that would account for the additional. The funding, $1.2 million, for the capital components are coming out of the reserve fund for the convention center that were dollars that were left. They were actually dollars that were built up during the delay of the construction of the convention center, when the extra 2 points that Santa Fe has authorized were being collected, but weren't spent. They're not actually bond dollars. They're lodgers tax dollars that are designed for either debt service or capital improvements to the convention center. So there's $3 million in that fund. This will take $1.2 million out of that fund.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? Councilor Lindell.
I'm going to pass for a minute.
Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Randall, I'm glad you provided an explanation on the source of funds, because I would have had without knowing that, I would have really balked at the terrace improvements, and it's really not really necessary. And so, and I guess I think that you should find ways to use the rest of those reserve funds for whatever upgrades, whether it's the LED lighting or whatever it may be. Let's get that money in service. It's been a long time, and let's get it done professionally rather than through staff. I think you know what I'm saying.
Mr. Chair and Councilor, that will be part of the funding for the LED will come from that line item.
Okay. All right. Again, let's get it done professionally. I also sent some questions on Sunday that were, my Sunday questions were community services and tourism. My Monday questions were public works and public utilities. I don't know if you received anything.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, I do have them if you'd like me to address them.
Good. Yeah, so if you would, kind of just quick hits and trying to keep it moving here. I appreciate Chairman Zabeta's whip.
So the first question was sources of funding beyond lodgers tax for Tourism Santa Fe and the Community Convention Center. We get funding from use fees as the spaces are rented. A hotel rebates, we get 6% when hotels are involved with a meeting that's being held at the convention center. 6% of the room charges that are incurred come back to the convention center, which allows us to be able to negotiate the prices for the use of the space with meeting planners when they come in. 10% rebate fees on food and beverage, equipment rental. The community kitchen brings in a very small amount of money, but we do get a little bit. On the Visit Santa Fe side, advertising sales on the website account for between $60,000 and $75,000 a year. We get the application fee for film permits still, which amounts to less than $2,000 a year. Hotel participation in trade shows. As our sales team goes out to trade shows, many times we'll bring in industry partners. We pay the entire registration fees for those shows, and then the hotels that participate with us give us back their share of the cost of those visits. Because we have to prepay them, therefore, when they give us back their shares, it goes in as a revenue item. And the Margarita Trail passports are the primary other income sources that we have that account for, between the two divisions, close to $1 million.
Okay. So, is it fair to say that all of tourism budget is covered internally by the types, whether it's lodgers tax or the type of activities that you described, or does tourism receive any money from the general fund?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, tourism receives $0 from the general fund. It's a true enterprise.
And that's actually what I thought. I just wanted confirmation. And so
next question was detail on the convention center debt.
Correct.
Brad is teed up to give you that information.
Chairman, Councilor Harris. So there's in the 2016 B, which refunded two bonds, one being one of the convention centers. The debt service jumped from the principal payment in FY 19 this year was $2,740,000. Next year it's $4.4 million. And the convention center, believe, gets 70% of that debt service. It's going to do this for the next 4 years. There's like this huge accelerated payment in principal, and then it drops back down to about $400,000. I don't know the background on the refunding or why it was refunded with this principal payment schedule, but it is a way that, much like what we did in the digester bond, we don't pay principal until 2023 because we have the 2012 wastewater bond, and we didn't want to overburden their revenues. One of the reasons why they were rated standalone AA+ was that their debt service stays above a 2 times coverage. So whenever they were structuring this, they were managing the city's overall debt service to meet various bond covenants. There must have been some room to accelerate this payment, and therefore that's what they did. It just to keep our debt service right around, 23 to 24 million.
Mr. Chair.
That explains, on that point.
On that point,
Yeah.
I was just curious if the debt service was also including the garage.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I saw essentially a 26% increase in the principal, the principal coverage. Percentage-wise, much lower, but that explains what's driving it is really how the debt was structured. And so it's accelerated in this coming year.
For the next 4 years.
Yeah, and the years after that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, the next question was the maintenance staff. How many FTEs and their responsibilities? There are 2 members of the maintenance staff, 2 FTEs. Responsibilities are just general maintenance and minor repair. We're obviously at this point redefining the level of any work that's done by the internal team, and we'll be working very closely with the new safety committee that the city manager has set up to properly define exactly what they will be doing going forward.
So any maintenance or facility function has been handled by these 2 individuals. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, that is correct. I mean, if when we repainted the ballroom, for example, the convention specialist became a part of that team for that major effort. But for the ongoing effort of the upkeep, we do it with the 2 FTEs. That's correct. And the last question was detail on the total cost and need for 4 new positions. I believe there are actually 5 new positions. 2 of them are in they're going to be an office of content creation, if you will. We currently outsource our newsletters. We currently totally and we end up with a product that allows us to check the box, but I don't think any of us are very proud of how well the newsletters are affecting our ability to properly market the city. The content creation office will support our visitor guide, and currently it's a third-party contract, and it will support other needs that both we have within the department, creating the content for the appearance for the Margarita Trail and some of the other programs that we institute right now will go to third party for it, and we will also support other city needs as other departments, Parks and Rec, other departments have needs for creative content. This office will be able to help from both the written word as well as design standpoint. There'll be sufficient savings to cover the cost of the creation of this office. Savings from third-party contracts that currently exist. Then the other positions, there's one that is taking a seasonal visitor center position and making it a year-round position. I like to joke that our off-season is gone. Our former off-season is now our shoulder season, and because we run about 60% average through the winter, and our in-season has increased from April and May used to be shoulder season, and now our hotels are running busy. Our city is busier. And so the idea would be there are currently 3 seasonal positions in the visitor centers. One of those would become full-time, and then the other 2 seasonal positions will be converted to year-round part-time, making them available in the wintertime when frankly most of our visitor center staff use their vacation time and other time off, and we get or if we have a sickness during the winter, we get pretty tight. And then the other 2 positions are related to the former litter patrol. We've had 2 full-time and 1 seasonal position in litter patrol. The proposal is to convert the seasonal position to a full-time and add 1 more full-time to the litter patrol and have that function be expanded to what we're calling a park ranger patrol, if you will, for the visitor areas of the city. It will be funded through tourism, but managed by the Parks Department. And these people will, in addition to picking up litter, they will serve as ambassadors for visitors to get information from, and they will deal with some of the less difficult issues with the homeless.
Councilor Harris, did you have any other questions?
Well, I do, but I think I should allow other committee members to jump in. But I've got a couple more.
Councilor Romero-Worth.
So as you were talking about the new term positions, the new bathrooms, I saw some plans for. There's going to be an information booth there. Are we moving the information booth from the plaza? Are we adding a new one? How's that going to work? And where's that staffing coming from?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I don't think it's been determined where that staffing will come from. I'm guessing it'll be out of tourism. I think we'll have the capacity to provide that staffing. The purpose for having a person there is so that the restroom facilities, the new facilities, when built, are not left unattended, and to ensure that the facilities are used for what they're intended. So, but I don't think the construction will happen until this fall at the earliest, with completion in the spring. There's no money in the budget currently to cover that extra person that would be required there. And the thought is that we will see where we are on our payroll budget by the time those facilities get done, to see if we could handle it within our current capacity, or if we needed to come back, we'd come back to the Finance Committee and Council if we needed to have an extra person for that staffing.
Okay, and then as I just was flipping through all our budget sheets here, who does all this? Does all this out-of-state travel? Is that mostly you?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, no. I do 1, possibly 2 trips, but generally about 1 max per year. It's done by primarily our sales team and our public relations manager. Public relations manager will do 4 trips to 4 or 5 per year for desk side visits with the press. Instead of bringing the press to Santa Fe, she goes out to New York, is a staple, usually LA, Denver, Dallas, Phoenix, to actually visit with the press in those areas get their interest, and then get the press to come to Santa Fe if they haven't done so already. Those trips are coordinated by our Lou Hammond group, which is our public relations company. The balance of the travel is done by our 4 sales professionals. We found the best way to bring meetings to Santa Fe is to attend trade shows where meeting planners and host cities and host hotels come together. And so David and his team of 3 salespeople do about 26 trips to go to these trade shows. Generally just one person. A couple of the trade shows are bigger, and they have both an association and a corporate meeting set up, and it's impossible for one person to do both. So on 2 or 3 maybe, we'll have 2 people attend. And this is where many times on some of the larger shows, we'll also have hotel partners join us. And so the whole function will have 4 or 5 people staffed. But again, we'll just be putting one person into that mix, with the hotels reimbursing us for their share. But that travel, yeah, I do a max of 1 per year.
And those trade shows, so we're mostly drumming up business. We're not, I don't know what the nature of those trade shows are, but we're not marketing made in Santa Fe type stuff there.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, that is correct. It's to bring in meeting business. There are actually 3 of those shows. I mentioned a total of 26. There are 3 of them that are consumer shows. They're put on by a very professional organization. They're called Travel and Adventure Shows. They're in, I think, 8 cities. We've done 2 of them in the past, and this next year we're proposing a 3rd. We've done Denver and Dallas for 2 years, and it's where consumers buy a ticket to come into the show. They pay about $20 a piece to come into these shows. In Denver, there were about 10,000 people came through, and in Dallas, I think it was 14,000. And so there are people who are actually paying to find out more about places to go. We'll be adding, a 3rd show we're adding this year is Chicago.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
Mr. President, thank you. I noticed that in the budget, page 4, that there in fiscal year 2016-17, there was at one time wayfinding signage in this budget. Does somebody else do that now, or nobody does it?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, I think it was left over from a few years ago, and the actual fund balance was removed. I think it was 2 years ago. But because it's a piece of the history of the department, I think the name carries forward. We should be able to shed that this next year. So there is no current. That was a project that was funded through a grant, I believe, prior to my arrival at the city, and it's those brown signs that you see from time to time that there are mixed opinions as to their effectiveness. So I think someday that would be great to have some additional wayfinding, but we this last year developed an app that now has about 1,600 downloads, and we expect that app, which really does help you on your phone get from here to there, is probably the better way to handle most of the wayfinding.
Well, I just...
Councilor Villarreal on that.
Well, after you finish that,
Okay,
I just want to add to that.
The reason I ask is because you may know I'm chair of the Bicycle Trails Advisory Committee, and it has been discussed probably every meeting that we don't do a very good job in the city about with wayfinding signs, because they're primarily focused on automobiles. And it's great when you can sit in your car and use an app, but for a bicyclist, they cannot do that. And what the wish of the committee is to attract more bicycle tours and all of those things that they do,
Sure.
which are very athletic, but also this city is prime for attracting people from all over the world. And that's one of the big downsides of our city, is that we don't, those who know the city or can use an app can easily get around, but those who are on bicycles don't have any clue about which way to go when you're on a trail, for example. And so I'd like someone in this city to start thinking about the other population that's not in an automobile but on a bicycle. And I know that, Mr. Mayor, we had a big meeting with a group of bicyclists, and they brought this up and mentioned many cities across the country where they're doing a better job. And I think that's another untapped resource in our city, where we could bring those kinds of bicyclists who turn into tourists, maybe come back in a car and vacation here. So we can't forget about that. And I'm not sure where this would reside, but it needs to become more in the forefront. And maybe if we get those little birdie scooters, which, they're going to need it too. I don't know. But that's something not to forget about.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Can you chime in on that real quick?
Well, I just wanted to clarify to talk about that wayfinding signage, because I distinctly remember that back in that time period that Councilor Lindell and I had requested moving money that you were requesting for art to be used for wayfinding signage, specifically for tourism, for locals. And part of it, there was like 3 different buckets. Public Works through parking put up signage for where to find the parking garage, and I think that was good. And then the Railyard Park put in money for wayfinding. So I'm just curious, what did you all end up doing with that? Because that was specifically, it wasn't grant money, it was moving money from art, that public art that you wanted to purchase, that it would go towards wayfinding. And I don't really know how that was used, because I didn't see anything new.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, that was not in that line item. I was just addressing that one that was called Wayfinder. The funds were allocated 2 years ago in the budget, and a small amount was used for the purchase of the dog, which was the art component of that. And Councilor Lindell and I worked on some. It was specifically wayfinding for the parking garages. There was a concern that people were not able to find the parking garages, and we have had those funds available. There is still a total of about $92,000 out of the fund of $120 that is in my current budget that has not been expended, and our financial analyst has already made the request to reappropriate those into next year's budget, again waiting to see if there's a use in either wayfinding or public art. As we build out the back of the convention center for the storage, if that proposal is approved, there's probably going to be a need for some public art there as well to complement the dog and fill in that some gap there. But those funds have, other than the purchase of the dog, and I think there is a current plan to actually purchase, as opposed to having art on loan, some art to go in the meeting rooms at the convention center. Most of those funds are available.
So I guess my point is that it wasn't supposed to be used for art. It was supposed to be used for wayfinding. The parking signs you're talking about, Public Works, from my understanding, that was funded by Parking Division, as I see a yes back there. So I guess I'm still wondering how we can use the $92,000, not for art per se, but for actual signage to enhance those brown signs, because they're very hard to read. I know there's a historic preservation, the code that we require to use downtown. There's a piece that makes that a little more challenging, but I think those signs really don't, unless you're walking, you don't see them at all. If you're on a bike, you won't see them. If you're on a car, you're not going to see them. So I think we need to make sure that if there's a remainder balance for the wayfinding, we need to use it for that purpose.
Okay, Councilor Villa-Coppler.
Thank you. I just want to make a point about the way we refer to our positions. And I heard I heard you say seasonal, I heard term and the like. So I just want to say that part-time and full-time can be any kinds of positions. I think I hear a lot part-time meaning really classified, and I think it just gets real muddy. And I would like to sort of clean, well, not sort of, but clean up the way we handle our positions, our FTEs, and name them correctly for what they are. So, you know, there's a list of definitions. They're in the personnel rules, but seasonal is really a temporary. And I hear you say you're changing those to full-time. Are they still temporaries? Or are you saying you're going to change them to classified? And if so, is that on the list we're going to get at the end of this?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil-Coppler, just to clarify, for the tourism budget for FY20, we are requesting 4 positions: a tourism visitor guide editor, a tourism visitor guide graphic designer, and the 2 park rangers that Randy spoke of earlier. And these positions, we will get you the classification and the breakdown that you have requested for those.
So do you know, though, are they temporaries? Are they classified positions?
Those are 4 new term full-time positions.
Okay, and the term comes from being funded by the lodger's tax?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, on that point, no, let me go to Councilor Villarreal, and then I'll go back to the committee. So your question.
Actually, I think Councilor Lindell didn't get a chance to speak from the committee, so go ahead and I'll save my questions after her, if you're okay with that.
Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Counselor. I just had a couple of questions. First of all, I want to say that on the travel and the trips, I actually accompanied the tourism department on one of those. What kind of trip do you call those? They're for the public.
Well, it was a consumer show. It was one of the 3 consumer shows.
And I have to compliment you on how hard you guys work that show. It's exhausting. I mean, thousands of people come up, and you know, it's like, I've been to Santa Fe, and you guys are so cheerful about how you deal with that with every person, even to the end of the day. So my compliments on that. So Ms. McCoy just talked about 4 positions, but you said actually we have 5. Now, in a conversation earlier, I thought that the assistant or trainee person that's going to work with Barb Lopez was going to be paid out of a term position out of tourism. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, yes, that is correct. We discussed this in the Parks budget hearing last week. There is 1 term position that will be for a special events coordinator, I believe is the title.
Yeah.
And that will be funded out of the tourism funding sources.
So that begs the question a little bit from me as to, should we be moving our special events coordinator that we currently have, Barb Lopez, into tourism and having her work through tourism? Do you have thoughts on that, Mr. Randall? I mean, I know haven't given you much time to think about it.
No, that's all right. Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, I think it's definitely tourism is a part of it, but I think it impacts the parks. It could be either place, and unless there's a good reason to move it, I wouldn't see the need to. But if it was decided by the city manager and the mayor and the council to move it to tourism, we would make Barbara feel very welcome and would be able to run the function as well. I think it's kind of a flip of a coin, and I wouldn't flip that coin unless there was a good reason to do so.
But you're not adamantly opposed to that happening and having that conversation?
I think we need to discuss it and determine what was really the best for the city, and that's where it ought to be located.
Okay. The other question I had was from what you said about the 2 park rangers. You're funding those 2 positions, but they're being managed by parks. Are you comfortable with that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, it'll actually be a total of 4 positions. Yes, I think, again, we're trying not to operate in silos. And just because they're being managed by parks, I think they have more of a presence in the outside of our spaces, and I think it's fine. But I think John and I would collaborate on how they work, and I want to be a part of ensuring their success and not just a critic. So we'd do it together.
So you said 4, so is that the 2 people on the plaza also?
It's the 2 current people that are in what I'm calling the litter patrol.
Right.
And then 2 more, and the 1 vehicle that we've acquired for them to use would move with that group as well. Because I just mentioned to John this morning that keeping litter as a primary focus is terribly important to me. It's important that we do these other things, but the downtown does look better since we've had 2 people picking up litter. Now,
Absolutely.
It's just 2 people, but we can't go backwards in trying to solve other issues. We've got to make sure that litter is a strong component, and that these people don't just become ambassadors. They've got to be busy picking up litter as well.
And what is the actual job description on the park rangers?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, that's something Parks will be developing.
So we don't actually know what we want them to be doing?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, I think we know what we want them to be doing, and that's what Director Randall has been saying. We want them doing litter patrol. We want them doing ambassadorship. We want them just being bodies in this area. So it's basically an addition to what they're currently doing. It's a presence in areas like the Railyard, the corridor between Railyard and the plaza, and at the plaza. We've been waiting for this formalized approval to finalize the job descriptions, but for what it's worth, we've already been having meetings with both directors, Randall and John Munoz, on this program, on what we want it to look like, and I think we're relatively confident we can make it successful.
So it's April 30th. When do we think that these people will be hired?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, you're approving a budget for beginning of next fiscal year, so that's what we would be targeting.
So it won't be until midsummer that we hire these people?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, it wouldn't be till midsummer that we're hiring the new revised positions. That's the budget we're working on now. Randy currently has positions that are litter patrol positions, and those are 2 positions which we'd be hiring. If they're not on already, we'd be hiring already.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Councilor, those 2 positions are filled, and if those individuals are not qualified for those positions would continue until attrition allowed those to convert over. So those 2 people are safe. They'll continue doing what they're doing. They're good, strong people, and I think definitely might be able to transition into the role once the job description is completed, but obviously it would have to be something they'd want to do as well.
I think that the program that you talked about earlier, the RX or whatever that's on the phone that is in the guide where you...
The Wayfinder app?
Yeah. The one that...
Margarita Trail?
Go on. Sounds like... It's
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, it's the app that you use in conjunction with our visitor's guide, where
right, that's the
you
one
scan
I'm
a
talking
picture and the picture actually
RX2.
turns into a bit of a video. Yes.
Yeah. I have to tell you that I think that it's really an amazing app, and people that use it are pretty dumbfounded by how awesome it is. So if we have any way of bringing more people into that fold and trying to, get people to download that. It's really kind of astounding to me how that thing works. So, Congratulations on that. I hope that program can be expanded because I don't know if it's unique, but I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I think that it's very edgy, and I think people really, really like it, the ones that have downloaded it and used it. So that's
Mr.
all
Chair,
I have, and thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, that app, the intention is to broaden it in this next visitor guide that comes out. It's to put better video behind it because we had to use video that we had as opposed to creating some stronger video. And frankly, the addition of the content creative office will allow us to make that much more of a wow than it currently is.
Thank you. Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'd start off with the positions. Well, first to say the capital improvements I think are worthy, and we need to upgrade and continue that LEED Gold certification and beyond. And then the positions that you outlined, the positions specifically that won't be outsourced as it relates to graphics and other promotions, I think makes sense. We, in the long run, will save money. What I am, I guess, concerned about, and it likens to what former Councilor Dominguez used to tell us about seasonal and classification creep, and this was a conversation last year for our budget hearing about how these positions, specifically called litter patrol, would become full-time, and he was right. So I just want to make that point, that he was concerned that if we were starting off with seasonal, that eventually they would become this classified position, and we should be careful about that. So I guess what I'm more interested in is about the park rangers and how they'll be utilized. And I see, litter patrols one and ambassadors, but did you all consider thinking about the park rangers? Because I'm assuming they will be, one of them at least will be focused on the Railyard. Is that correct?
Mr.
Railyard
Chairman,
Park.
Councilor, the 4 individuals will be focused on Railyard and the plaza. I don't think we're going to be assigning some to one area and some to another.
Okay, so, but isn't it up to the parks to decide how they want to utilize the rangers?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, the answer is yes. With our input, if we're going to help fund this, we're going to ensure that it is effective from a tourism perspective as well.
So, did you all consider the possibility of having that position fund security? And the reason why I bring this up is because we've had multiple conversations with the stakeholders at the Railyard, and they've requested utilizing a security guard, one that could show a presence but also be an ambassador on some level, and be able to assist folks not just that want to know what's going on in the Railyard, but also people that are needing services, whether they're integrated services related to homelessness, that they could direct them to the right places or call for services. So did you all consider that possibility, since we've been getting requests regularly about the need for that versus someone that just is there to pick up trash?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, we've actually in the Railyard Visitor Center for the last 3 months actually 4 months, had a security person dressed as a visitor center person. It's been successful, but probably less than successful. I had thought that we were converting the one additional person in the visitor centers, and what that was going to allow us to do, if we're able to do it, is ensure that we always have 2 people in the visitor center. I think we'll be better off if we can, rather than having someone that a security firm provides, and we try to teach them to be a good ambassador and a visitor center person, by having one more person, we will not have to staff the Railyard Visitor Center with a single employee. We'll always be able to have 2 there.
Well, when you talk about the Railyard Visitor Center, that's at the train station. Is that what you're referring to?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, yes.
Okay, because I'm actually talking about on the park in the Conservancy, Park Conservancy. So that's why I'm wondering, the park ranger, are they just going to hang out at the visitor center? Are they actually going to be in the park?
No, the park rangers will be between the Railyard and the downtown area. I want to be sure that we realize we're not suggesting that these people are security personnel, and they aren't necessarily going to be trained for security purposes. They are going to be, in addition to litter, in addition to helping visitors and residents find how to get from here to there, they're going to be extra eyes for us, and they will be able to, if there's a need for security, they will be able to recruit it. We are not proposing through tourism to provide security for the Railyard.
And I guess I think we should, only because we've asked and been requested by community groups and stakeholders that there is a need. So if we can try the park ranger and a less like security kind of emphasis and try to see if even a physical presence helps, I'm fine with that. I just want you to know that we've been asked numerous times for this to be more of a security focus because of the need and the issues that we face, especially during the summer when it's warmer and people are camped out and there's issues. So I don't know how, I guess it's okay to be termed, but I don't know if there's a way to try this out so that we can think about the possibility of them having a different role. And I want to flag this because maybe midterm that we can look at how it's going and decide if we really need more of a security presence, as well as they don't have to be this kind of force that people are afraid of. It's really someone that's approachable, and they had success in the Railyard doing this before, but the budget was cut a few years ago. So just something to think about as we think more about what the rangers could possibly do. The other question I had was related to the budget pieces. Let's see. So one of the counselors brought up, Councilor Romero-Worth brought up the travel, and what I was wondering if maybe staff could let us know why they consolidated, because there's a lot of blanks that were either taken off the list and consolidated maybe. I think it starts to be consolidated on page, let's see. And I'm assuming that's what you were doing, that the consolidation of travel. I don't know, there's just a lot of blank spaces of past travel and the amounts that were spent. And then there's one, okay, so out-of-state transportation. Maybe you could describe on
page are
page
you on?
4. No, that's only 40,000. There was 110. So maybe the way you could describe it, staff, is the way that finance, I'm assuming you all consolidated all the travels into one line item, or did staff do that?
Battery out.
Or you could go up to the.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, the 110,000 is for registration fees, and those are the seminars. Those are the. That's the registration cost. Then the travel. And then the food and beverage goes under per diem. It's just the way it's broken out, and the detail is incredible.
So all the details to the right are, if you add up those numbers, that totals 40,000 in out-of-state transportation.
The sum of the detail totals 2 or is greater than the total amount of the budget. I did check one of them, and it actually added up to a little bit more than the budget, but we can live within the budget dollars that have been requested.
Right. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand the format. There's one item that talked about new contracts with IDSS and Crowd Riff, and those are, I'm assuming, what are they called? their software subscriptions, but one was listed on the Lodgers CVB, and then the other one was on page 13, which I think goes to the convention center. So are those two separate subscriptions?
Mr.
And why aren't
Chairman?
they consolidated if it's the same two entities?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, it's the same piece of software. The cost is split between the two because it's used for space management within the convention center, and it's used for communication tool with our partners in the Visit Santa Fe side.
Okay.
Because our funding is split by formula, we have to split out we have to share these expenses where there's a shared need.
But they get it's about a $60,000 contract for both. Oh. Each.
Yeah, IDSS is a little less than 40,000, and what else is in that? CrowdRiff is 20,800, and CrowdRiff is a photo management system. It's where we can inventory our photos, and it has it's a new system we're going to. We used to have a software called Barbershop. CloudRiff is going to allow people through Instagram type things to actually give us their photography. We accept it, and then it becomes part of our inventory. So we're going to be able to reach out to the public and have them share their experiences with Santa Fe and have it actually go into our photo inventory. It's pretty slick.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure if they're split between the two, it's one package, and then they charge us separately for each of the divisions, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. So there was one budget change about the farolitos downtown, so I'm assuming they're the facolitos that we put around town, but expanding to the downtown area beyond.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Councilor, this last year we took over the installation of farolitos on the convention center. We bought an inventory, and we had enough extra that we're the ones who put it up on the library. This is an idea. It will replenish our spares that we need to have that we gave up for the library last year, and we want to expand it to the downtown parking garage. Anywhere that we have a building, we want to expand the presence of farolitos in the downtown area. So that is just the purchase of farolitos. It's not the labor involved with the install.
Right. Which is just the electrical piece, because they're facolitos, right?
They're facolitos.
Okay.
We don't light them each day. That's correct.
Right. I'll light them myself. So the other piece was, I guess I was hoping maybe not in this conversation, but maybe a staff person could send me information about rentals and the percentage of rentals that go to local groups and organizations and local events versus out-of-state, out-of-town events, and that breakdown, and what that's looking like, because it doesn't really say or describe to us what's happening in terms of percentage of business for local versus out-of-state conventions. I know that you said you wanted to increase rental facilities, the rental of our facility. So there's that piece that I want to look at, and I also want to understand, and not at this moment, but why we decided when we first started the convention center, what vendors would get selected to be utilized within the convention center. I get a lot of complaints of people wanting to do events there that are willing to pay the fee for the rental, but then when they start adding up all the costs to utilize whatever vendor we have for the AV and the caterers that are selected and all the number of things that are included in an event, that they can't afford it. So when we keep talking about the community convention center, I sometimes feel that it's not like how it used to be in terms of accessibility. And that's why we get so many requests for waivers, because people don't feel like they can actually utilize that. So if you could provide me with that explanation, because I just feel like maybe there's a way to expand how we look at utilizing outside vendors versus the ones that you all selected, because tends to, from what I hear, become a monopoly. And I know we want consistency within within the facility, but I guess I'm curious why we haven't thought beyond just who is selected.
Mr. Chairman, I can very briefly, we do not select the vendors. Anyone who provides services can request to be a service provider at the convention center if they can provide insurance, and if they're a food vendor, if they can put up the deposit. We require a $2,000 deposit. They can do business, and they can offer their services to our customers. So we do not make a selection. It's the industry that self-selects.
So I thought there was a selection process, especially for caterers.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, no.
So someone could bring in their own caterer as long as they have insurance?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, they have to have food permits. They have to have, and they need to apply and become a caterer for us. We will make exceptions if there's a good reason to, but to protect those who do put in a deposit, a security deposit, and provide services on a regular basis. But there is no vendor who is a licensed food provider who cannot apply for and receive permission to be a caterer in the convention center. What we don't want are one-offs, because if they just come in on one-offs, they take our equipment, they abuse our equipment, and it's bad business for us.
Thanks for the clarity. And it would be good to see who's part of that list, I guess. I know there's an application. I just thought that there was a certain criteria.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, David will provide that to you, as well as a list over the last calendar year of the uses, how much was local, how much was related to group rooms is the way we break it down, and then we also have a separate list for city uses over there.
Okay.
We'll provide all three of those to you.
That would be great. The other piece that we don't really see, but in all different departments, we actually see the grant-making selections, whether it's through community services or CDC. And I don't think I've ever seen OTAB grants and who got selected and any of that information. I think it would be important to just, for transparency, to see who got selected for those grant recommendations and what the criteria was for the selection process. And I don't even know at this point who's part of OTAB, so maybe the membership would be good to know.
Okay.
And last but not least, I saw that, well, there's two things. One was that we didn't budget for any events for the South Side. It was part of the budget last year, but I didn't see it in this year. So how are you accounting for or supporting South Side events?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, there's $12,000 in the budget for Southside, which is the same number we've carried for the last 2 years. There's also funds in the Arts Commission budget that you reviewed a week ago that supports the South Side.
The weird thing is, unless it was moved to somewhere else, the contractual services, it said Southside Bandstand, 10,000, was not continuing on to FY20. But I don't know if it's in another line item.
Should be at the end. In there where the rodeos and there's fiestas, the rodeos, the OTAB grant. Under 510400 on, well, my big pages aren't numbered, so it should be about the second one back. It shows $20,000. I'm sorry, I said it was $12,000. It's $10,000 for Southside and $10,000 to support New Year's Eve. That's the $20,000 under 510400.
So it's less than last year. It says minus
Mr. Chairman,
2,500?
Counselor, it was $10,000 last year.
How come it says
But
22?
there's an amount coming from Arts Commission also, so total those two together and it's more than 10,000.
Mr. Chairman, it's over 20.
Okay.
Okay, just making sure that's carrying over. And then the last question is that I see that we are obviously focused on launching or promoting Indigenous Peoples Weekend. I think that's fine as it relates to tourism draw. I was curious, though, for the actual Indigenous Peoples Day event, which looks different or should be different because it's really a community and cultural event. Do we have any amount of funding that we're thinking about that would go towards a co-organizer for that specific day, not for the weekend, but specifically for Indigenous Peoples Day? And the reason why I ask is because I think in the past we or last year we worked with former Governor Rivera, and I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that there's an amount that is not the weekend, but that day, which is very specific. And the reason why I think it's specific is because I think it should be a local and indigenous person that knows local culture, and I'm not talking about for entertainment purposes, but actually a community event that brings in community, not just local talent, but activism and cultural roots-related speakers. And I mean, entertainment could be incorporated, but I'm just curious. I want to understand your vision for that day.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, from a budget standpoint, there's $10,000 available for Indigenous Peoples Day, which has been, we've actually been spending a little less than that over the last 2 years. Governor Rivera 2 years ago was the honorary chair, and really didn't participate in the actual creation of the weekend. The primary focus is on Monday, Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'd love to have any specific input as to how we do that. Ryan Dodge within our department is the one who puts that together since the departure of Rema Christ, who used to do it. It's the majority of the funding is for the entertainment, because we want to reimburse the tribes that send dancers in, and a small amount goes for the lunch that we host for the governors and lieutenant governors. It's been the last 2 years at La Fondant Indigenous Peoples Day to celebrate the importance of the day. But if you have some other ideas,
I do.
I'd love to incorporate.
I do have ideas, or at least community members that might want to be considered. I don't know what the process would be, but I just think the Indigenous Peoples Day, it looks different than the weekend, which can be a celebration of culture in the way that you see it for tourism purposes, which is entertainment. But the actual day, Indigenous Peoples Day, I've had requests from community members to make it a more community-oriented event with community groups, either having booths or having speakers, having more than just entertainment, but actually kind of more awareness on Indigenous issues and things happening in the community, positive and negative, to kind of balance out what's happening in our Indigenous community. So if I can help in any way, I can certainly, I'd be happy to, considering my other contacts with my nonprofit world that I work in. So please work with me on this, or I can direct people to you all that are interested to help.
No, Mr. Chairman, we'd love to work with you on it. And again, the primary focus, it was originally just a Monday celebration. Last year we added Saturday and Sunday because of Balloon Fiesta. And it is, but the primary focus and the primary expenditures on Monday, and we would love to work with you on it.
Great. Thank
Okay,
you.
we're approaching an hour on this department. I'm going to go back to Councilor Harris, and then I'm going to ask for a motion.
Yeah,
Councilor
thank you,
Harris.
Chair. So, for me, the issues are really a bigger picture, and has to do with the impact of tourism. I realize this is your job, everybody who's sitting there, and we talk about different endeavors that have gone on, and including some new ones that I just heard Councilor Villarreal. But to me, the impact of tourism is not all positive. It's not. There's strains on our resources, both human, our infrastructure, and any number of things that that I don't think we don't account for. And I think in part they should be accounted for in the tourism budget, and in part. Now, tourism does a number of things. You talked about litter patrol, but that's just downtown. If litter's an issue to you, it's the eye of the beholder. I see it all over town. And people who drive into our town, people who fly into our town get the same visuals throughout our town. So, that's not related to my first statement. I'm not saying that tourism are throwing their plastic bottles out the window or things like that, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I realize there's constraints with the statute associated with the lodger's tax. Has there ever been an effort, either coming from your office or Statewide Lodgers Association, to open that up, to have some sort of recognition what the negative impacts of tourism are?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, I have to be honest, I don't quite agree with you as to the negative impact of tourism. I think it's a great economic generator for the city. The benefit of tourism is through gross receipts tax. And the lodging community feels that the GRT that's created by tourism is sufficient to offset any particular costs that are related to the tourism that the city might incur that is not covered by lodgers tax. But cities operate on GRT.
The lodgers, excuse me, but so clearly I'm asking the question of the wrong person. You don't agree with me. But the lodgers tax, for the most part, is going to driving more tourism, not less, to filling hotel rooms, not less. And yes, you're picking up trash around the downtown area and maybe the Railyard. And yes, quite frankly, it feels like throwing the dog a bone when you just put $10,000 towards the Southside Bandstand. I mean, it's just, in part, quite frankly, you can make the case that you got to create a Southside Bandstand because the summer bandstand series, for the most part, doesn't feel like a local event. So, anyways, I know you disagree with me on this, and so I would have to take it up with someone else to see if they have a more expansive view of what lodgers tax can pay for.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that the enabling legislation that the state put in is pretty clear as to the purpose for lodgers tax is exactly what you described. It's to perpetuate and grow tourism throughout the state of New Mexico. Again, if the GRT from tourism could be isolated, I think that's would be terrific to use it for.
Here's an example, Mr. Randall. Here's an example for you. So I went to a tremendous gathering. The mayor was there this morning. The Mayo Clinic now has a contractual affiliation with Christus St. Vincent's Hospital. We all know about health tourism. Well, health tourism in Santa Fe with our two hospitals, with the other care providers that we have, whatever that may be, I think that's something you should work towards.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, great. I'm sure
we
we'll
will,
run with it.
Jordan, I'm sure we'll get it within our market.
All right, that's my soapbox. I don't want to drag it on, but I have one last question about the Air Alliance. The Air Alliance has got $100,000 from your budget, and that's support the federal grant, correct? Or is that support operations for the Air Alliance?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, it's to support the marketing effort that the Air Alliance produces to bring in both more flights or to have more seats filled on the existing flights so that we protect those flights. It is not for the operating costs of the Air Alliance.
Okay, so it's all marketing dollars.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, it's either marketing dollars or revenue guarantees should the Air Alliance, with the city's concurrence, enter into future revenue guarantees. There are no
because we've already burned up the American revenue guarantees. Those are gone.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that's correct.
And so we have a real problem taking any more flights, even the one that starts Friday from Phoenix. There, even after it was agreed to, there was an issue about whether we can handle it. So I guess I really have, a concern whether we're trying to build up funds for future service guarantees, which, as you know, Intervest, the consultant to the Air Alliance, we shouldn't do those. Airports shouldn't do those. So I guess I really question, the $100,000. We'll see. Was that the same number as last year? And how much did we spend?
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, this past year the budget had 100. In fact, it's moving forward to transfer 50,000 to the Air Alliance strictly for the purpose of marketing existing flights. The other 50,000 will be diverted into new production costs for the new ad agency.
I'm done, Chair.
Councilor Romero Worth.
So on that point, I was going to ask the same question. So none of that 100,000 is service guarantees.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, none of it is.
Or does that come from somewhere
You
else?
mean for revenue guarantee?
Yeah, revenue guarantees.
Right. It's just
Sorry.
the lodger's tax law was changed 2 years ago to allow lodger's tax to be used for revenue guarantees. So should the city enter into revenue guarantees or approve the Air Alliance from doing it, it could be used for that. I am totally in agreement that revenue guarantees should not be a requirement, and particularly until we have an airport that could handle more capacity. So the whole driving force for the Air Alliance right now is to increase the loads on our existing flights and ensure that we don't lose any of those flights.
And so to that end, it's mostly marketing.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor, that's absolutely right. And it will only be transferred to the Air Alliance as it's needed by the Air Alliance. If they don't have a good, we're not just giving them the money to build their budget. They have to have a plan to use it before it comes back to council to move that money. And it does come back to council to move that money.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call for a motion regarding the tourism budget.
I'll make a motion to approve the tourism budget.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to move to our Public Works Department. And I believe, Ms. McCoy, there was a packet of information that was given to us a few days ago regarding the Public Works budget.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. That should be in the green folders that staff left in your offices. There are a packet for Public Works as well as a packet for Public Utilities that was left for your review. These are, as you were reviewing with other departments, the budget expenditure summary. It's an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper for Public Works. And in addition to that, we have also provided the budget detail, which are the 8.5 by 14 sheets that go into the same level of detail as you have seen for other departments.
Okay, and when I look at the summaries by category, I see overall there's a 4.9% increase, but there's a 12.2% increase in contractuals and utilities, 89.2 in repairs and maintenance, 22.9 in supplies, and 11.9% increase in other operating costs. So, Ms. Willer, if you could introduce your staff that's with you today and start with those items that are summarized by category and why the increase, and then we'll get into questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, members of council. Regina Wheeler, the Public Works Director. Thank you so much for having a conversation about our budget for FY20. Sitting here with me is Margie Wagner, who's our acting fiscal administrator for the department after the departure of Bobby Huseman this year to join the county clerk's office. I have John Romero, who's the director of the engineering division, and Javier Martinez, who's the director of the streets and drainage division. And the other division directors for the Public Works Department are also here as well. And the question was about the increase in the amount of our budget. And I had itemized some of the big ticket items that are causing this increase. One of them is there's an additional $500,000 for Midtown. That was never part of our budget before, and now the Public Works Department is carrying the Midtown budget and the responsibility for maintaining that campus, of course, in close partnership with economic development. There's also a significant increase in the parking revenue as well as expenses associated with the implementation of the new revenue assurance system, the PARKS system. So there's debt service associated with that of approximately $200,000 a year. There's additional revenue, and then there's also some transaction fees associated with that. And that system will really relieve the congestion and departing from our parking garages because people can prepay and you don't have to pay at the window as you're leaving. And that's so it'll be revenue assurance as well as convenience for our customers. We also have a $300,000 increase in the facilities division for fire compliance. The fire marshal is doing an inspection of all city buildings, including Midtown this year, and we want to be prepared to respond quickly to anything that's found there. With that review, there was also over $200,000 increase in the ITT and general assessments against the transit division, which made a significant increase in that division's budget as well. Oh, and the parking division is also experiencing an increase of $500,000 of debt service, and that's associated with the increased general overall expense to the city of a higher debt service payment on the convention center garage this coming year. And we have other small pieces. There's some division-specific software that has moved into the department budget, and some of our facilities that are leased are expected to do some reimbursable repairs this year.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Regina, for coming in and introducing your staff and bringing everyone else along. Just a general note on page 1 of the Public Works admin. I assume we all have the same pages, but this is the only place I think I saw that employee health insurance had actually gone down. I know in many of the other areas it's gone up everywhere, and I think from I would expect, I guess, an increase in all the employee health, and just a general note on that.
Super healthy director, maybe, part of it? I never go to the doctor.
And then there's on page 4 of this first booklet we have, on the Railyard operations, contractual services, there was an increase from fiscal year 18 of 136, and now a recommended budget of 324,000. I was hoping someone could speak to that.
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, it looks like it's a flat budget of FY19, but and maybe an increase over actuals.
Yeah, it's on page 4, and I see what Councilor Rivera is asking. It's got actual FY17 100, FY18 actual 136, and then FY base is 324. So I guess what is the discrepancy in why is it 324 as opposed to the 136? Or are we not reading the spreadsheet right?
Well, I think it's...
Mr. Chairman, I believe Public Works handed out the Q&A ahead of the hearing. These are some of the questions I believe that Councilor Harris had emailed ahead of time, and there is a breakdown of that. Regina, would you like to review the...
Oh, yeah, okay, I see it. Railyard Fund 324, 563. That matches what's on the spreadsheet, and it's breaking down where it's coming from. So, yeah, if the committee can refer to the Public Works spreadsheet. You have it, Councilor.
Regina, can you walk us through
Sure.
that you provided? Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, members of the committee, the Railyard Parks Conservancy is a $150,000 contract for maintenance of the park.
Okay, and stop right there. Is that the same as last year?
Is actually this year it increased $50,000.
Okay, and I think we had a discussion about that at one committee I was at before. Okay, continue. Thank you.
That is an increase. And then the Railyard market events and marketing is at $75,000.
Is that an increase from last year, or is it the same amount? Okay. Okay.
And then the balance of that of the Railyard fund pays for the Railyard projects administrator.
And is that the same as last year?
It is.
Okay. Okay. All right, Councilor Rivera.
Thanks. I didn't get a chance to look at that, so some of my questions may be on your sheet, so if that happens, just let me know about it.
What was the increase from the Parks Conservancy?
I don't believe there was. It's 150,000, and it was 150,000 last year. If there was an increase, it was 50,000 the year before last, it sounds like.
Chairman, it increased this fiscal year, so it went
Right,
from
but
100
it was 150, and it's going to be 150
FY19,
again.
correct.
Okay. Councilor Rivera.
The next section of the booklet, which talks about the airport, and again, if this is in the spreadsheet, just let me know, but there are several line items on page 9 that talk about services of other city departments. Can someone speak to that? What is that? I don't know if that's for the finance director or maybe the city manager, but there are 3 line items there that talk about services of other city departments.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, those are the assessments for general fund services such as HR, finance, and payroll, as well as ITT and fleet, which were moved into internal service functions. So that's where those costs are paid. For example, the cost of maintaining vehicles, the cost of maintaining the city's network.
So the support those other departments provide for public works, that's where it comes from.
Correct.
How come the 3 separate line items instead of just one for?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is for tracking purposes. Those other 2, you don't see them in there because that's kind of a code that we know you're not going to be interested in, but there's something called a subsidiary code in there, and that code identifies for us, okay, this is the IT charge, this is the fleet charge, or in the case of no subsidiary, this is the general fund services charge. And that's basically how we tell them apart and eye them out, make sure that they're balanced and all that good stuff.
Okay, so the third one there is going from 109,000 in fiscal year 19 jumping to 185,000. Do we know what that's for? Is it
which division is that in again? Sorry. Oh,
airport
or fund?
I'm afraid I do not, but we can find out.
Okay, that's code 563100.
I'm afraid I don't know offhand, but I can research that.
All right, on the next page, page 10, capital purchases for over $1 million. Can someone speak as to what we're gonna purchase this year with those? That 1.1 million or?
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that's for the purchase of snow equipment. That was a grant that was received, and we have purchased some of the equipment, and we'll finish purchasing that equipment before the snow year this year. And I believe that was budgeted this fiscal year and nothing for FY20. Is that what you see as well?
It says 32,000 in fiscal year 19 and 1.1 recommended for fiscal year 20. Is that right?
That, yes, Chairman, thank you. Counselor, that is a match for the snow equipment purchase.
Okay, it is grant funding. How much snow equipment do we get with that? Is it just one piece of?
We're doing a spreader for the de-icing. We're doing a plow, maybe some sweeper as well. Everything we need to keep the runways open.
Mr. Chair, do you want to, I don't know if you want to have me go through all my questions or just have everybody focus on maybe that page 1 and 2 sections, or I'm not sure how you want to do it.
Just keep going.
On the last page of the airport, it talks about transfers out, inter-fund transfers out. And again, probably for Miss McCoy or Andy, I don't know who. But there was almost $500,000 in transfers out for fiscal year 19, and then now there's none, so.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is the airport subsidy that comes, I believe this year it's coming from the general fund, and some amount for capital in 3102, but I would need to confirm.
And that's a transfer out, not a transfer in?
That's a transfer out because it's coming from an old code in the general fund that's marked airport. That way it shows up. Otherwise, it would have to show up somewhere, so it would, be in transit or parking or something.
But we don't need that anymore?
I believe that's this year. That was no longer needed at that level.
Okay.
So it's based on need.
And then at the bottom of that page talks about contractual professional services, and it doesn't look like there's anything budgeted for that again, so just want to make sure that we don't have any contractual services that we need to budget for.
Yes, Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that was a grant for the Small Community Air Service Fund that was 100% expended.
Very good. So now I'm on the next booklet, which is the traffic division, streets, paint shop.
Now it starts on page 14. And you are on which page now, Councilor Rivera?
Page 22, Stormwater Drainage. Again, pretty small budgets in fiscal year 17 and 18 with 17 and 3,000. And then it jumps up to 460 and 537. What kind of contracts are we talking about there?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, could you please repeat what figures you're seeing?
Yeah, on page 22, it's the last set of figures that there are. 17,200 in fiscal year 17, 3,000 in fiscal year 18, and then a pretty significant bump.
Oh, there we go. So it's 17,000, 3,300 on the 460 base budget, 537 recommended.
Right. Why the big increase from 17 all the way up to 537 now?
From 17, I can't speak to that. But the current $77,000 increase, what I can explain is what it's comprised of. So we have $40,000 total for our annual contract with the Santa Fe Watershed Association, $12,000 for stormwater training sessions, $100,000 for our MS4 water quality sampling, and that might be one of our main increases that we hadn't had in the past. Stormwater infrastructure, System JS, mapping update. You just seen the amendment to the contract with Tetra Tech for that. A lot of this is actually a reappropriation of a current contract that we're not expecting to expend by the end of this fiscal year. $200,000 for stormwater infrastructure survey data and collection, hydraulic analysis of culverts 50,000, and fiscal analysis of rate structure 60,000.
How much of it is carryover, John?
I would say at least 300.
300 of it.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman, Councilor, if I might add, as you remember, the Council just approved the adoption and implementation of the Stormwater Management Plan, and now we're in full swing of implementing that plan, and it's all really timely after learning so much from the storm last July. We know where our needs are. We have a great team in place to implement that plan. We have really good itemized direction about where we need to do work, and we're doing that work. And it's funded by the stormwater fee, so it's a unique funding source.
To answer your initial question, why the jump from the 17,000 is because we weren't as actively pursuing our stormwater plan. So right now we're elbows deep in it, and really, this is for all those efforts that we've been doing the past couple of years.
On page 24, there's a line item for remodeling and replacement. What are the plans for that?
that in engineering again?
Still in stormwater drainage.
Mr. Chair, Council, that is one of the questions that was asked on this sheet, I believe.
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, that 200 increase is we're proposing to increase our remodel and replacement line item from 100 to 300,000 for stormwater infrastructure repair and maintenance due to storm damage.
How much of that storm damage do we still need to actually take care of?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, so we temporarily mitigated some of the initial damage, but there is a lot of infrastructure improvements that we need to do to prevent future damage during future big events. So this money is looking to do some of that. We're also going to be looking to do a lot of the more expensive improvements through future bonding that we're going to be bringing forward to council.
That was my question. Is there enough money in this fund to do that, but you have other sources?
We will be proposing a bond that will be bringing forward to council. It was included in the resolution that council recently approved as one of the items that we would be pursuing as part of our stormwater master plan implementation.
All right, the next set or the next booklet, facilities, maintenance, admin. Third line down on page 32, there's seems to be a pretty big increase in repair, maintenance, buildings, and structures.
Yes, Chairman, Council Member Rivera, it is a increase of $300,000 for addressing fire marshal identified issues.
That's okay. And then the services of other city departments, is that all what Andy spoke to? In every line item you see it, it's going to be HR, IT. Okay. That's all I had for that booklet. The next one, College of Santa Fe operating repair, maintenance, and building structures on that page, page 41. Can you just speak to what we're going to be using that for? Is it to repair buildings that are already in or that need repair, or is this to cover anticipated costs?
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, yeah, it's actually both. We have quite a list of issues identified with the buildings. We're stabilizing the campus. It's much more stable than it was when we first started getting our hands around maintenance at the campus some number of months ago, thanks to the council and the finance director and city manager appropriating funds at mid-year. We have a full-time person now who's managing the property maintenance of the campus, and we have contracts in place, and we have contractors moving to repair issues. We still have a number of outstanding issues, including some of the damage from frozen pipes last winter hasn't been repaired, and so we're slowly but surely making ground. So I would say that probably half of the money is already identified for projects, and the other half is for unanticipated failures that we'll discover as we move forward.
The next booklet, which starts on page 43. Pages just mean you guys are overworked, you know that, right?
We're a big department.
Yes, you are.
You missed my speech. Chairman wouldn't let me give my speech about how big and awesome we are.
I don't think I have any questions on that one. The next one, which starts on page 58. Last one that starts on 68. For Transit Bus Administration, page 70. It's contractual service, but it's consulting services. Can you speak to that? For 150.
Yes, Chairman, Counselor, thank you for that question. That is our multimodal transition plan study that we're doing. It'll include an evaluation of our bus service routes to optimize for ridership and mobility for our community, as well as we're planning to integrate a study of parking and how we can use all the different aspects. You know, we manage the city's entire transportation system, the buses, the roads, the parking, the trails. And so we want to have an integrated study that tells us how can we become more multimodal, more sustainable, and serve our residents better with a strong mobility system.
Is this a study you're currently doing, or you?
It actually was budgeted for this fiscal year, and it has not started yet. It'll be done next fiscal year.
Is there carryover funding for that as well?
There is.
And do we know how much is actually carryover?
$150,000.
All I had, Mr. Chair.
Okay, staying with that line of questioning, Councilor Lindell, do you have specific questions with these line items? And then we will have general questions after, but I do want to focus on these numbers first.
Just a couple.
Okay, sure.
By the way, hello and welcome. On page 3 of the, well, it doesn't matter because these are sequentially numbered. So on page 3, under Railyard, what are the dues that we pay? Who are we paying dues to? $32,827.
Mr. Chair, that is our condo association dues for Market Station.
Okay, thank you. Clears that up. And then down on the same page, FY20 recommended salary $84,966. Why is that salary bounced around so much? For example, from FY18 to FY19, it's almost a $20,000 increase.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, if you look in FY18 and personal day, miscellaneous leave, comp time, sick leave, incentives, we've stopped budgeting for every line item in salary. We just budget the salary line item. And then when payroll pays, they pay out of those line items. We don't budget at them, because that would be a nightmare.
Oh, but did somebody get a $20,000 raise? I think is the question.
No. I mean, it was, if you add up all of the annual leave, personal day, miscellaneous, comp time, sick leave, incentives, we do budget incentives. We do budget overtime, but the rest of the salary line items are just rolled up into the salary. And so I would aggregate those numbers in FY17 and FY18 from sick leave through salary, and they should be fairly consistent once you've done that.
I'll yield the floor. The other questions I have are not specific to numbers.
Thank you. Councilor Harris, specific to these numbers.
Well, I mean, this may be, but my first question was on the Railyard Fund, and Councilor Rivera asked that. Maybe a more general question is kind of, given the last conversation from tourism, I would think that some significant portion of this could go from lodger's tax. As it stands right now, where are these? The Railyard Fund is a standalone, correct? And how is it funded?
There are two primary revenue sources to fund all the Railyard operations. The first one is the fee we receive from the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation, and the primary source is a 1/16th increment of GRT.
But thanks for the reminder. I should have known that. But those revenue streams don't cover the cost of the other, whether it's these items, the administrator, the Conservancy, or SFRCC. They don't really cover the cost of Railyard operations. And I should say that I received kind of I don't want to call it a sneak preview, but Mr. Flitch has been working on really a full analysis, a historic analysis, financial analysis on the Railyard property, and so perhaps my question should wait until we really roll that out. So I'll move on. Thank you.
Any other questions, though, Councilor Harris, about the line items in the budget?
Real quickly, again, on the airport, there was asked and answered on the Small Community Air Service Fund. I didn't put a page to it. These are just the questions that I asked. I don't know if people want to wait until I flip through all this stuff. But then I asked a separate question, similar to what I asked of tourism. Do you have $100,000 line item within Public Works for the Northern New Mexico Air Alliance? Is that correct? Or no?
Chairman, Councilor Harris, I don't believe we do. That money comes from grant funding, which we have not received this fiscal year, and that was expended all this current, but next fiscal year it's not achieved yet. We will apply for the grant, and if we do get it, we'd bring it to council to bring into our budget. But since we have not received the grant, we don't have that budgeted.
Okay, I guess I was just confused because I asked it of Public Works, and you answered it, and Mr. Baca provided the answer, but okay, I'll move on. And so on engineering, Councilor Rivera also spoke to one of my line items, the bump from 100K to 300K, and I realized, so all that work is really identified. Is that correct? Probably either Mr. Romero or Mr. Martinez. So we know what that $300,000 is going to go for?
Well, for specific projects, yes. Well, one of our priorities is going to be some improvements in the Santa Fe River. After that, whatever money we have left over, we're more than likely going to use that towards design efforts of construction projects we're going to look to fund through the bond.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I'm just want to make sure that we budget it and we can put it in service as quickly as possible. And I think it's certainly possible in this line item. I'd mentioned also the question about training and tuition, and this is a theme that runs through many of our departments. I don't remember the absolute number in facilities, but I've seen some $500 line items for training and tuition. I've seen $1,000, and that doesn't. That puts maybe a booklet together. I don't know what it does, to tell you the truth. And so how do we arrive at that? Is that just something that we don't believe we have money for? Because in my own professional experience, as well as observing whether it's work here at the city of Santa Fe, we really have to provide training throughout all of our departments. So do you want to speak to that, Ms. Wheeler? Particularly your folks are among it's just the work that you do requires ongoing training and tuition.
Chairman, Councilor Harris, it's a great point, and thank you so much for raising it up. It's a really important issue to address better, and I think the numbers are usually small in the under the $10,000 to get some significant training, and so we can move it around from other line items as we arise to that. But we could do a better job of developing a training plan for the facilities team, and we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, well, that'd be good, and I think it's certainly not just for Public Works. And so the most significant budget I've seen that's really specific to training was in HR. Don't know if that was all work internal to HR or some of that budget was going to go to, for instance, Public Works, but it's something we certainly need to look at. And actually, I would be interested, Ms. McCoy, to see a total number for the dollars that we've got budgeted, and I'd like to see it by department. As long as you can pull it up, you can pull it up by department for training and tuition. I think we'll be surprised, given the size of our enterprise, and I'm talking about the city of Santa Fe, just in the budget we're talking about here. I think we would be astounded at how little we do.
Chairman, Counselor, if I might add a little bit to that, I very much support training as well, and Mr. Romero's team is continuously doing CEUs and doing state-of-the-art training to find out what's going on, participating with DOT, and some of the other divisions do as well. And so we do have some good, robust training going on. We're sure to have everybody get the training they need to keep their licenses current across the organization, whether it's a PE or an electrical license or a GB98, because we have a number of those. So we do support the training, and it is brought forth regularly, and we can do a better job of planning for it.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's great. So I asked about the debt service numbers for the Midtown campus, and the answer was finance can provide. And I should also say that I editorialized a little bit because I was very pleased to see separate budgeting for the Midtown property. And the flip side of that is that should have been done from day one on the Railyard property as well. So we're getting ready to hear from Mr. Flitch down the road, but that's again, we're starting off right on the Midtown property. We may not like the numbers, we may not like the burden, but at least we know what we're getting into. I don't believe we knew what we're getting into on the Railyard. So, anyways, debt on Midtown.
Chairman, Councilor Harris, the significant decline in debt service on Midtown campus represents the refunding of the 2009 NMFA bond to purchase the Midtown campus. In fact, you'll be seeing the Finance Committee just saw the ordinance on yesterday, nor Public Works saw it last week. Finance will see it in the next meeting, and then it'll be read at the first reading will be May 8th, and then hopefully we'll be approving that ordinance at the end of May, 1st of June.
So the aggregate of the two numbers, let's just call it 1.7, okay? As opposed to the magic number was 2.2. The 1.7 is offset in part, I thought, the bottom line number was offset by the flexibility we got on the call feature, the annual call feature. I didn't think it was going to be this low. Is this the only place in our budget that we're carrying debt or showing the debt service on the Midtown property, or do we show it elsewhere?
That is correct. That is all of it for Midtown campus.
Okay. All right. And is this a relatively stable number over the years, the next 5 years, for instance?
That is correct. This is a 20-year amortization with NMFA. And these are NMFA's proposed numbers that they gave us when we first approached them about refunding it.
Okay. All right. Okay. And this is net of the various features. So this is it. This is the number.
That is correct. And it would have been about $100,000 to $140,000 more savings, but the cost of the flexibility is $100,000 to $140,000 a year.
Okay. All right. Very good. Can I keep moving? On parking, I think that answer is self-explanatory. Parking admin salaries are down 1.1%, yet employee health insurance for the same category is seemingly the same category is up 147%. And that's increase of employee benefits is a constant theme throughout the budget, but this one struck me as just being a much higher number than I'd seen in other departments.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Harris, we did we budget health insurance for vacant positions as if it was a family of 4. There's a significant difference between a single, a couple, and a family of 4. And so there's vacant positions in parking, and we budgeted at the high end, a family of 4 rate. So a single person is like $7,000. A family of 4 is $16,000, $17,000. And that's the city's contribution. And so when we budgeted the family of 4, it significantly impacted those departments with high levels of vacancies at this point in time.
Okay, well, I mean, you used the same formula throughout, but that one, there was just such a disconnect in terms of the salaries, and the decrease of salaries essentially flat, and the 146%. All right. I think Councilor Rivera also asked about this, or was alluded to, and that's the 22.6% increase for parking. I think the answer is pretty clear. Relates to the meters, the park assurance, and probably the biggest number that goes into that is moving, the debt we have on the parking structure and what's required for us to service that debt for the coming several years really increases parking's share. Transit. I asked about overtime. Transit is the one area, and it shows up in transit bus, it shows in Santa Fe pickup, it shows in paratransit, all show significant increases in overtime pay. As opposed to, I just hadn't seen that much, dollar-wise, nearly that much overtime except for those positions. And I don't know why that is. I know that we've seen from some of the folks who are in the bus transit, they felt like there was a low wage, and maybe we have a harder time attracting, and so we've got to use the people we have, I assume. I'm not necessarily opposed to overtime. To me, then it gets to a safety issue. If you pay too much overtime, people get weary. That's just it. And certainly, we had a very unfortunate accident with one of our equipment operators within Public Works, and that's really my concern. Not that I think the individuals who are ever getting the overtime don't deserve it. I think they probably do, but I get concerned that we're really not covering the positions like we need to.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Harris, for all departments, all divisions within all departments this year, we have taken a different methodology for budgeting overtime. We've taken the average of the last 2 years, and that's why you see the uptick over the budgeted level in the current fiscal year. This is to start to right-size the overtime budget to what actuals are in previous years. So one of the examples that we reviewed with Public Works during their budget development is actually for streets. Their prior year actuals for drought years will not match up to what they will be potentially encountering in future years that are not drought years. So that's one change that we might have to make at mid-year next year if we are in a severe winter again, where we are seeing additional overtime for our streets division. We will, similar to what we did with potholes, be addressing that particular shortfall if it arises next year.
Right, and I think what you've told me, Ms. McCoy, is that historically these categories, bus transit, paratransit, and Santa Fe pickup, then have higher overtime costs than some of the other departments. I haven't seen numbers like this in some of the other departments.
Yes, Chairman, and Councilor Harris, yes, the problem with the pay of the transit operators has exacerbated this issue over the past number of years, where the turnover rate has been unbelievable. I probably signed 5 PAs a week, position administration forms for this division. They're constantly hiring. There's people constantly leaving, and it did drive the overtime up, but we've got to successfully addressing that with this budget, I think, as we do the class and comp implementation and the 2% adjustments, and we are really expecting that that'll help us stabilize our staffing and really reduce the overtime and really take care of our operators and make sure that they're not fatigued. And we had a really great year for safety last year during the summer with the transit division. The division director and I were just actually speaking about that. But it's a stress that we have to be very careful of, and we are monitoring it, and we think that this solution will really help us in the long run.
Well, and I agree. I think that's wise. I think those are the things we should be doing. And it really is more about just, like you say, fatigue, drivers getting weary, and just a lapse of being aware. My last question really had to do with the confirmation that the Santa Fe pickup is funded by the Lodgers.
And Mr. Chair and Councilor Harris, that's a partial funding.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. Is it $500,000 total?
Mr. Chair, councilors, on this answer sheet it says $300,000 in lodgers tax to support Santa Fe pickup operation.
Right.
That's not the total cost, though.
Right, but that's not the total. That was what came out. Whatever it is.
About 400,000.
Is it 400?
Director Wilson said yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I think that I don't see any reason why wouldn't that all be lodgers tax. I mean, again, this is something that we're not going to resolve today. You heard the conversation, the question and answers, and somewhat dismissal of Mr. Randall onto my question on lodgers tax and the uses of it. But as long as I'm around, I think it's something we should pursue.
Chairman and Councilor.
Frankly, I think that I would just as soon look at what it might take to fully fund the Santa Fe pickup from lodgers tax. I don't know what that $100,000, if it comes from general fund or whatever it may be, but if we could look at that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, Councilor.
I have, Chair, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Harris. Councilor Romero Worth, specific to these line items. Councilor Villarreal, specific to the line items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think few questions. So I don't know where it would be located. I'm assuming in the engineering line items. Is there specific funding sources, and are they staying the same, or are they decreasing, or are they increasing related to speed monitor equipment? And then also any funding associated with designating speed reduction measures? I don't know where they would be in the budget, though. And if you can just speak to any increases, decreases, or maintaining.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, regarding speed monitoring equipment, I would have to defer to the police department. They do manage the speed trailers that go throughout the city. If you're referring to traffic calming and things of that nature,
that's what I'm referring to. Sorry.
That would be on the capital budget side. And so I think right now we have available in cash. Of course, cash is accrued as officers issue tickets. I think right now we're in the $250,000 to $260,000 range of cash available. And so when the traffic calming program initially got implemented, there was always more projects than there was money. Right now, we do have the money. It's just qualifying the projects based on the requirement is what prevents some projects from being implemented.
Okay. Does that also include those signage, electric speed? I don't know if this is in your department. I think it's all connected. I just never understand where the funding source comes from. But specifically those speed limit, electric signage, or money that we utilize for speed humps or other techniques.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes. So the speed monitoring, permanently placed speed monitoring signs would just be another form of traffic calming. It's part of the traffic calming program.
So 250, 260
is right now what we have cash available.
Cash available. And do you think that's adequate?
Again, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, based on the history of applications that have come in and have qualified, we to date have not had an issue of money.
Okay, good to know. I think, let's see.
On that, I didn't realize. I know.
Loves.
Yeah, other people are using that phrase. Now I've lost my train of thought. Okay, so traffic calming. I didn't realize that was funded by tickets. Is that what you just sort of alluded to?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor, it's a traffic calming fee that's assessed on speeding ticket.
Just speeding.
That's my understanding.
Do we?
We'll need to research that.
I'd be curious about that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Villarreal.
And then for parking, the overall budget, I wasn't. See, there's so many papers here. I know there was an increase about 27%. Can't find it. There's too many papers here. It was on the overall general budget increase. It's at 27%, maybe 20-something. I can't.
22.5%.
Thank you.
You're right.
So what's the largest increase for the department?
There, Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, there's a number of large ones. There's a $500,000 additional debt service for the Community Convention Center garage. There's a $200,000 increase in debt service for the new revenue assurance system that we're purchasing. And then there's approximately another $200,000 in service contract costs for that revenue assurance system as well. So there's a lot of significant. It'll also bring in extra revenue, so some of that costs are balanced with the revenue.
Okay. And so we had talked earlier with tourism about the debt service for the garage. How is that split again? Because I know in the past it was inequitable and parking was taking the bulk of it, and then we adjusted it, and now I'm just curious what the percentage is.
The convention center, they split this 37% parking, 63% convention center. And the reasons it had been modified in the past is that previous administrations had allowed parking to be billed the debt service to the extent they're getting the revenue from the parking garage. And so this year we did not limit their debt service to just the fees they get. They got their full allocation.
So I guess
in addition to the increase in the principal payment due.
Right. And so who decides if that's fair, or do you all feel like that's adequate? I see. No, not adequate for parking. So is there a way to restructure that? I don't know. I just feel like because I know the convention center doesn't necessarily benefit from the parking. It doesn't necessarily go to the services they're providing or events, but it is connected as part of the infrastructure. So I've never understood since I started here why parking they used to take a larger piece of the debt service, and now I'm just curious if what was the justification for this percentage breakdown? Other than what you just said, was there anything else
that was the actual original percents when the parking garage of the total construction cost of the $30 million was roughly 37% of the construction of the convention center parking garage complex. So, I mean, and that's just been the same percentage going all along. And then in the 2016 B bond, which is another related to the convention center, it was allocated by the bonds. So we refunded 2 bonds into one. And that's a 70-30 split. And it's between the general fund, or I should say Fund 3102, the 0.5% municipal GRT, and convention center. And so we allocate these bond costs out.
Chairman and Councilor Villarreal, if I might add to that as well, we had a discussion about this with finance, and there are reasons why there's not as much revenue from that community convention center garage, and one of them is that employees park there. So we're thinking about undertaking an exercise together about really assessing what is that facility being used for, where are the costs properly allocated, and really just getting right down to the nuts and bolts of it, because you can swing one way, convention center, swing the other way, parking, but it might be a little finer resolution really issue. What is the cost of the free events that we sponsor, and just to really get some detail on that, and then make some better decisions about where to allocate. But At this point, I think we have a balanced budget for Public Works thanks to the work the finance team has done, and we're happy to support the city, that way until we have a better understanding.
Mr. Chairman, councilors, this is the problem that Regina identified as a problem that we're seeing citywide, where we are not accurately accounting for expenses and revenue. The parking garage, the employee passes that we provide to our employees, we should be allocating that expense somewhere within our budget, and simultaneously we should be allocating that revenue to parking. So that is one classic example that we can use, that we're going to be partnering with each of the different departments to start accurately accounting for expenses and for revenues throughout the city.
Great. That is exactly what I want to hear, especially because we do need, that was the whole point of having that garage, was also to have employees park there, but that shouldn't be something that parking has to take the brunt of the expense, or at least it's less, but I still think it's inequitable. So I'd like to look at that further, and I'm glad you all are considering that. This is a small amount. I always bring it up every year, but I couldn't find it in transit, was the bike share initiative, and where that went, or how that was folded in, or if it was, or...
Yes, Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, that program is still alive and well, and actually has exceeded its sort of forecasted budget by about $10,000 at this point, but it's not a real expense. It's actually just a loss of revenue by the people that get to ride for free because they've received a chain breaker bicycle. And the transit division has been monitoring that and spot checking, and the people that are using the passes that they get, they do have bicycles, and so it seems like it's really vibrant and well utilized.
What's the amount for that?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, it's $15,000 for this year is what the expense is so far.
15 this year, but next budget year.
Same, we'll budget the same and probably have the same.
And I asked just because there was supposed to be an analysis that I never saw about the use and ways to expand it via other nonprofits like LifeLink. There's other groups that also could possibly benefit, not just from a bike from Chainbreaker, which I think is important, but I think there's other groups. And I'm just curious, the last budget cycle, we talked about doing an analysis, and I don't know if anyone ever came up with...
I have an analysis in my inbox from Director Wilson that I can share as well.
Please, that would be great.
I guess the extent to which we decide to expand this program will erode the revenue of the transit division, and so we'd have to really do that consciously, and we can certainly bring that conversation forward to the Public Works Committee and further if we choose.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think that's all I have for now.
Okay, Councilor Vihil Coppler, and again specific to these line items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the parking division, page 47, at the bottom of the page, in parking enforcement, I note, and these are the people who go around and give parking tickets. This division is that correct? That's the division that's responsible for that?
Chairman, yes. Councilor Villarreal, yes, that's who that is.
Okay, and so I note that there's significant vacancy savings credits that have been taken from there. So I'm assuming that could be a result of positions not being filled, or...
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, we have budgeted a 9.5% vacancy credit for both salaries and benefits organization-wide.
Okay, so it's not based on any experience in this division.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, not at this time. We hope to get there as we have more regular reports for the POL and are able to determine. We had this exact conversation with the departments yesterday that vacancy credit should be taken based on the actual experiences from the department. And so our methodology to calculate that, once we have the monthly POLs, now that the Human Resources Department has done a great job at cleaning up the POL, we'll have regular reports on a monthly basis where we can actually calculate the monthly vacancy rates and then apply that over the course of the year to future years' budgets.
So what percentage did you use to take those credits?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel Koppler, 9.5% for both salaries and benefits organization-wide. And the all of the departments, when we calculated this for a point in time over the last 2 months, with the clean POL, we every single department was above that 9.5% rate, except for tourism, I believe, was the only department that was not above that vacancy rate.
Is that 9.5% for each or combined? 9.5% for salaries, 9.5% for benefits. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
It seems quite high, but so I guess the drawback could be that if all positions stayed filled for the fiscal year, then we're going to be essentially 9.5% above budget. But that'll play out. But I mean, I recall in days, I don't know, Councilor Romero Worth would know more than I, but they used to take like a 1% vacancy credit savings by department. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. On that same page 47, I note that overtime is also being requested at half, only $1,500 for overtime for enforcement.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihel Koppler, the methodology that we are using for the FY20 budget for overtime is we're taking the average of the 2 prior year actuals that we have, and we understand that, and this has been applied consistently for each division throughout each department. And as I mentioned earlier with streets as an example, if the average of the 2 prior years of actuals was based off of 2 dry years. So if we encounter another severe winter, we will actually be looking to reallocate within the existing budget or coming back to council next year at mid-year for an increase in the allocation for overtime. But this is the standardized methodology that we have used throughout public safety and other departments to bring actuals and prior year actuals into our analysis for the future budgeting cycle.
So my question to Ms. Wheeler is, when you schedule parking enforcement, do they have a different schedule than Monday through Saturday? Monday through Friday, or are they scheduled so that when I know Sunday's free parking still, is that right? Let me start there. Okay, so do you schedule employees differently for the events that we have?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, yes, the parking division is really diligent about doing shift bids so that the schedule can be matched to when there's a lot of usage in the parking facilities, when there's need for enforcement. And so we've done 2 shift bids in the past year to really optimize the allocation of staff to the need.
And so those shift bids, they occur, you said twice a year, so like every 6 months. So can employees count on the schedules they're going to work?
Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, Vihel Koppler, yes, that's why you do a shift bid, is so that they can count on that. And then there's union requirements for the contract for how you have to notice the change and make the changes.
Okay, and then going to page 49, field collections. Is that where you go take the money out of the parking meters?
Chairman, Councilor Vihel Koppler, yes, it is.
All right, and on overtime, there's no overtime budgeted. So how do we, is it a pretty manageable schedule where you know you're only going to take the money out when people are scheduled to work and there's no money collected on off hours?
It is very predictable.
Okay. No, wait, do I have one more? Yes. So I have another overtime question on, off-street parking. On page 51. So there's a lot of overtimes recommended there. So off-street, so the question I asked before was, parking enforcement, is that just, wait a minute. Off-street parking is the parking meters then, am I right? No.
Chairman, Counselor, it's the parking attendants in the lots is off-street parking.
Okay, so all of the overtime is there, it looks like.
And that's where we have, we absolutely have to cover the lots and have people there to ensure our revenue at this point. And if we have a call-in, someone may have to stay after. And so that's where we would experience most of our overtime is in that off-street.
Well, then how is that different from the Railyard garage where I've been told you kind of have like an automatic thing going on there?
It's a great point, Chairman, Counselor, that when we have the park system implemented, then we will not need as much staffing time from the parking attendants, and we should have savings there.
Are you able to share this overtime with the Railyard garage?
Chairman, Counselor, actually this is for the Railyard garage, for the Water Street lot, for Sandoval.
So it's for all of it?
Canyon Road is for all of them.
Okay. That concludes my questions.
Okay, I'd like to spend a few minutes now discussing the rail yard. And I know you have prepared a handout for us. Has everybody seen this, gotten a copy of this on their desk? Okay, so let's talk about the rail yard.
Mr. Chair, councilors. This is something that the Financial Planning and Reporting Division of the Finance Department would like to, our intent is to do this for all of our enterprises. And that's really look into them from a longer-term perspective, do a more historical, long-term look back, as well as forecast the future for them. So the first page is the Railyard history.
Brad, can I interrupt 1 second? I think you're underplaying what you're doing. I think this is much more significant than that. I think what you're doing is really important, and that is to look at the entire asset portfolio of the city. Councilor Harris earlier this afternoon talked about disinvestment as well as investment and managing our investments more strategically. And I think this is, if I interpret this correctly, based on the conversations you and I and Mary and the city manager have had, this is really just chapter 1 of an asset-by-asset assessment of how well or how less well the city has been managing its portfolio. And it's not just looking at them as accounts, that it's looking at them as the entire base of assets that we have assembled over time, sometimes thoughtfully, sometimes out of emergency need, and sometimes simply without really giving it a great deal of financial planning. And so this is kind of a beginning of an ongoing series of these kinds of presentations looking at all of the portfolio that the city has and then thinking through how we're going to use our financial resources going forward and making some choices, because this all of the budget conversations so far, as the questions have indicated, are basically about choices. And the choices that the mayor, the governing body together make about using our financial resources to get the outcomes we value the highest. So I would not, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think you as they say in golf, I think you shorted this one.
Well, just to clarify then, my background is as a securities analyst. I've been a portfolio manager of other people's money for roughly 30 years. I analyze companies, entities, just about anything with a balance sheet and an income statement. And when I noticed when I came to the city that, and I've noticed this in government, that they spend a lot of time looking at revenues and making sure that that there's enough revenues to cover their expenses, but very little effort is used to look at the balance sheet of a government. In the private sector, the balance sheet is there to support the operations of the company. And if it's not supporting the operations or of the company in the way it's moving now, they liquidate those assets and convert it to cash so that it can be deployed into another asset that actually serves the purpose of the governing body, the board of directors, or whoever. So the one thing I had noticed immediately on my hiring is that the city has a very large balance sheet, and a lot of the assets don't appear to be performing to the level you would expect. And I've shared this opinion with the mayor, the finance directors, the city manager, and a number of the council. So this is my first look into the assets on the balance sheet of the city. You gotta understand this is $1 billion entity. That's our balance sheet. And so we're gonna start looking into those assets and seeing where that $1 billion is, and is it performing, and is it serving the purpose of this board and the citizens of Santa Fe. So this is our first look into it. Thank you, Mayor. So the interesting thing is the Railyard started in 1995 when TPL, Trust for Public Lands, negotiated and acquired the 50-acre parcel. And then they conveyed the entire parcel to the city, where they kept 12.5 acres for the park. The primary Railyard partners are the city of Santa Fe. We are the landowner. We own the ground underneath all of the Railyard, all 50 acres. Our primary debt on that is the infrastructure debt, which is the 2010B bond, which we'll get to in a minute, the Railyard parking garage, and the Market Station condo debt. The Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation is a 501c3 nonprofit, and they did a master lease with the city. They leased the 50 acres, and they collect the ground lease revenue, run their operations, and then convey, per their contract with the city, a revenue stream. And then the last main group is the Railyard Park Conservancy, also a separate nonprofit 501c3, and their mission is to manage the park and the gardens within it and the conservation easement. When you look at the Railyard revenues, I'm on page 4 now. GRT, as I'd said earlier, they receive a 1/16th increment of GRT. And so for the last 10 years, for the period 2010 to 2018, a total of $17,430,000 of GRT was put into the Railyard fund. Primary expenses of the fund have been infrastructure debt, the parking debt, operations, which we saw in the Public Works Administration budget, some of the line items that you were looking at, Market Station, security. It's a large amount, but it was only 1 year, 2014. I don't know why in 2014 that $110,000 was of GRT revenue was used for security at the Railyard, but it was. The next and only other largest contribution is the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation. And
Brad, you missed the 898,000 park.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. On the 898 for the parks, that goes to the Railyard Park Conservancy. And in their agreement with the city, they are to match that 898,000. While I have reviewed the Railyard Community Corporation's audited financial statements since 2008, I have not yet looked at the Park Conservancy's financial statements. I will be making that request of them shortly.
I'm sorry, when you say match, what do you mean by that, Mr. Chair?
So if we put in 900,000, they're supposed to raise 900,000 for a total budget of 1.8 million.
To maintain the park?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The primary debt service, the infrastructure debt is currently the 2010B bond. It was originally the 2004 NMFA loan that was, the 2004 and 2006 NMFA taxable loans. We refunded that in December of 2014. Outstanding debt is $7.6 million. That includes both interest and principal. Last payment will be June 1st, 2016. Annual debt service payment is $1,070,000. The parking garage debt is the 2000.
Brad, I just want to clarify. You said last payment date of
June 1st, 2026. Okay. Okay, yeah, 2026. The parking debt. This is not funded by parking. This is funded by GRT revenues, and parking is not subjected to the debt service. It refunded the March 28, 2006 bond from NMFA. We issued $13,780,000 2013. Outstanding debt as of June 30th, 2018 is $12,820,000. The last payment will be June 1st, 2036, and the debt service is $970,000 annually. Market Station, this is for the purchase of the condo. We refinanced that June 13th last year. We were going to use the boneyard, the 8,000 square feet of empty space, for non-government purpose. It was a tax-exempt bond, but because we were going to use more than 10% of the space for non-government use, we had to refinance that into a taxable issue. Last payment will be June 1st, 2033. Annual debt service is $362,000. When you look at the financials from 2010 to 2018, the Railyard, between what the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation and GRT, we generated so much revenue. We've had these various expenses. I do have spreadsheets that support these numbers, and if you want more detail on what goes into them, I have that detail available. The other debt are things that are the Market Station condo and the Railyard parking garage. They're not really in the park or the Railyard enterprise funds. And from a fund perspective, Railyard is Fund 5850 through Fund 5859. And each one's for parks, one's for operations, one's is for the, anyway, there's 9 different ones. And then, in this period of time, the total subsidy from the city, not including, this is in addition to the 1/16th GRT dedicated to the Railyard, has been $21,524,000. When I project forward, and I'm using, and again, I have my projections, pretty simple, straightforward. I projected forward for the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation. We have a master lease through 2030, and they have a contractual level of lease payments they need to make to us. The lease payments reflected here as SFRCC are those contractually obligated payments they are to make to us. The GRT revenue is a simple, I say down at the bottom, I grow GRT at 2.5% annually, rate of inflation. I grew the expenses at 2% rate of inflation. Debt service is the actual, or other debt is the actual other debt service payments that we have already scheduled and amortized. And therefore, the expected subsidy that we would be making, again, in addition to what the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation pays us and the 1/16th GRT, will be over the next, for the next 11 years, will be $24,580,000. Oops. And so, that's just to let you know that, if we do nothing about the rail yard, we will spend an additional $24 million in addition to probably $20 million in GRT that we're going to contribute to. So that's where we are on the rail yard.
Councillor Harris.
Well, this is, it's good to start seeing real numbers on this. When this would be before your election, Mayor, and Ms. McCoy and others, as we started to look at the Midtown property, one of the things I was saying, I believe Councilor Lindell was saying, because we were involved from the very beginning, is that we cannot replicate what we did at the rail yard, what was going on at the rail yard. And this was just kind of a gut response to what I felt was going on. So when you look at the real numbers, it's kind of worse than you thought, or that I thought, I should say. And I don't know what the answer is at this point. I think there just has to be a really hard look at, is what Mr. Flitch was saying. Really, we are a billion-dollar enterprise if you look at the assets we have, and whether it's this or Northwest Quadrant or Midtown property or on and on it goes. And we just, we talk about sustainability, and we've got a plan, but it certainly doesn't address the financial sustainability of any number of things, including the rail yard. So this is a good place to start that conversation to really see what we truly can afford over the next 10 years and beyond. How many tourists can we get?
But we have to continue the conversation. We can't have it again a year from now. We've got to, actually, I think we've got to create an urgency around this, and we need to start tackling the tough questions and issues. And a lot of it, if we're going to fix this, the decisions might not be popular, but somebody's going to have to make them at some time, or continue to pay till it's up to $24 million, I guess is what I'm hearing you say. Right?
That's correct.
Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, you said from 2019 through 2029, we're looking at the 24,580, plus you said around 20 from the GRT?
Well, it'll be actually more than that, because you look at the GRT up in the first line, and there's 11 years there, and the last few years are closer to 3 million than 2 million. And so, if it's 10 years, it's probably 25 plus million. 11 years, it's going to be, it's a large number.
So I in following on Chairman Abeda's statement, I think it's incumbent upon this council to make a decision. Hopefully we have some options, but we're talking about almost $50 million in the next 10 years.
That's
and pardon? Correct. $50 million in the next 10 years, $5 million a year, as compared to what? What else we might do with those monies. And I think that those are, I think that's a topic that we're going to have to tackle. Is that where we want to appropriate $50 million? It's a hard conversation to have, but I hope that this council will have that conversation, and whatever direction that goes and what the decision is, we just need to not kick this can down the road again and again and again.
Well, and if we decide that we do want to, then I think we need to explore, should that be something that we're responsible for directly and not have a third party do it. I mean, that's part of it also. Because I think sometimes, like in my perspective and being new on the council, you think, oh, well, there's the Railyard Corp that deals with that, and you don't realize that it's actually money that's affecting the city and our ability to do our job as a governing body, especially when it comes to funding other needs that we have in the city. And so I think we need to take a look at that also, and not only the structure of and then the other thing, I've spoken to the mayor about this too, is we need to learn the lesson from these setups, especially as we move forward with the Midtown campus. Tierra Contenta Phase 3, we need to look at that also. Is that still what we want to do? Is that still, especially given what we're finding out, the large investment that we're making or the amount of money we're putting into these projects? Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I want to thank you, Brad, and for the work of the Finance Department. And this is just a first chapter of a book you're going to continue to fill out for us chapter by chapter as we look at the assets that are under the city's management. And I don't think this is intended to cast any kind of aspersions on the Railyard Corporation or prior administrations. I think what we're doing is what we've been doing for the last year, which is to do self-assessment and discover accurately where we really are, and then analyze our choices going forward. And this is as much a truth as what the McCard report was useful for, what the audit was useful for. This is another form of a self-audit, and I really appreciate the detail with which you've gone into this, and I know you've shared it with the leadership of the Railyard Corporation, so this is not a aha, gotcha presentation. This is an ongoing, to the chairman's point, this is an ongoing conversation. I think it does also raise several other points that we ought to put into our ongoing agenda. First is to look at all of our other substantial assets and see how they're performing. And you mentioned some of them, Counselor. There's the Northwest Quadrant. There's the next phase of Tierra Contenta. There's we started down this road with the convention center, but it's also an asset that's managed differently from some other of the city's assets, plus all of the property that we own that we're trying to rationalize and make sense out of and dispose of if it doesn't make sense. So this is a terrific start. I think it raises fiscal questions. How do we want to use our resources? We are all, one of the conversations that is an ongoing theme in the budget hearings that has come up consistently is to say to our department heads, we're asking you to do a lot of work and we're not adding more resources. One of the reasons we're not adding more resources is because we're using our resources on other things, and that's a choice. So we need to look seriously at the trade-offs that we're making and determine whether we like them or we want to adjust them. To the credit of Matt Brown, who is not here at this hearing but will be in the future, he has opened a conversation with the folks on the Railyard Corporation about a new way to think about the development there to see if, is it time for Railyard 2.0? What has been done there is a build out of the existing plan, but if we're going to continue to invest in it, we ought to analyze other ways to grow that asset and utilize that asset. And Matt has, I think, taken it upon himself to create a structured planning conversation about what else could be done to make the rail yard an even more vibrant place with more activity and more, not just more economic return, but also more social return, which was the original intent of the project. Chairman Abater raises a governance question, which I think is really important, not only with regard to this entity, but with others. I've pointed out in the past the city has a planning arm. Most cities also have a development arm. Albuquerque does, or a redevelopment arm. We don't have that. And we ought to think as we professionalize and improve on the performance of city government as a $1 billion publicly held corporation, if we don't want at some point to consider having not only a planning operation but also a development or redevelopment authority that could take the responsibility to take on projects rather than putting them into the hands of a body that really we don't appoint anybody to the Railyard Corporation board. They are self-appointing, and they are only responsible. They don't tell us what the deals are that they're making. That's completely their business. It's not the city's business, according to our relationship with them. And so we've created a Chinese wall of sorts between the city and this entity that is managing the rail yard on our behalf, but without real participation. And it's a model that we've used elsewhere, and it may be a great model, but it's also subject to reassessment going forward. So I don't think this is, I think this is, as you said, Chairman, the beginning of a discussion about governance, finances, vision, ongoing urban planning, and the fabric of the city as we move forward. It is really a good place to put us. So as you said, Councilor Harris, we don't do with the Midtown campus something that is not thought through ahead of time. We should make our choices, not only financial choices, but also our governance choices and our urban planning choices in a consistent way that reflects the priorities of this body. So I come back where I started. I think this is a really excellent piece of work as an assessment document. It raises questions. It doesn't try to answer them. It's our job to keep asking those questions and then among ourselves to try to develop the answers, whether they have to do with the economic development strategy that Matt's working on, partnership with the Railyard Corporation, and application of governance and structure inside city government going forward. I'm really grateful to you for doing this.
Councilor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions on clarification of the information provided. So the date of 2029 is when the agreement with the Railyard Corp is completed. Is that correct?
I believe the master lease ends in 2030.
2030. Okay. And then, so in your breakdown, it talks about the GRT revenue, and then the Railyard Corp that comes from net ground lease rent, and then there's other revenue. What was that again?
Other revenues, there's been, the Railyard Corporation has had events there that they've generated, I think, up to maybe close to 100,000. There's interest income, capital gains and losses from the investment activity because it carries a fund balance, and it's invested by the portfolio. And so it's just a lot of odd little things, but I can detail those for you.
Okay, that would be helpful. And then on the expense side, it says city expenses. Is that maintenance primarily?
Well, the city's expenses include the debt service, operations. We spend a lot of money developing. You know, we're still adding construction projects, Railyard
projects,
special projects. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, for instance, pedestrian crosswalks across the rail, the rail trails is one example.
Okay. Anything else in that category?
Again, I have I've detailed all of these in a comprehensive spreadsheet, so I can get you.
Yeah, just wanted to know what these categories entailed, just so we know what aspects.
There's wages, salaries, benefits, operating costs.
Right. Okay. And I guess I'm curious, when this first started, when the Railyard project came about, I wonder what the numbers told us then, even though none of us were around, because they probably had a pro forma like we see now, and tracking what it would cost and what the debt service would be and where it would hopefully taper off. I'm sure that they didn't come up with this number, so I'm wondering if we have that information. 'Cause we're not comparing it to what they were projecting then, and it's not or maybe they didn't even anticipate the potential economic downturn that happened, and that you can see in the numbers are very clear where that took place. So have we ever looked at this compared to what they were projecting when it first began?
I have a CD of the original master development plan, which I haven't looked at yet, but I do have some information. I don't know what's in the master plan, but it was written in 1997, 1998, and started being implemented in about 2001.
Because wouldn't the Railyard Corp also have that projection, and then how it relates to city expenses? I just would love to see what it was looking at then compared to the realities of now.
The Railyard Corporation, and again, like I said, I had done an analysis on their, I have their 8 or 10 previous fiscal years audited financials, and their main primary source of revenue is the ground lease, and from that, their payments to the city are roughly about 60% of the total ground lease. They don't really see the city side they don't see the parking garage debt service. They don't see the market station condo debt service. They don't see what we're using the ERT increment for. All they really see is the ground lease revenue, and that generates their budget, and they spend what they do out of the ground lease revenue and give us about 60% of what's left.
Right, but at the time there was negotiation to look at the Railyard Corp as it connects to the city and our relationship and partnership. There was probably a financial analysis done. It wasn't like we said, all right, good luck, we hope it goes well. It was probably this breakdown, maybe not in the same way. It would just be interesting to see what was the projection then.
Yeah, I'll contact Richard and see if he has something.
Oh, somebody has some info?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilor Romero Worth.
are you done? I think I'd be interested to remember the legislative investment in this property, both, I believe, the park and the farmers market pavilion or whatever it is. Those were rich years at the legislature, and there was sizable investment, infrastructure investment put in this property, and I think we should remember that.
Councilor Rivera.
Just clarification, Brad, on your pro forma, you said the Railyard GRT you had factored at, was it 2.5%?
That's correct.
And then the SFRCC?
Those revenues are contractually obligated by the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corp in the master lease.
And is it based on a percentage or?
It's kind of there's been a number of amendments to the master lease, specifically starting around the Great Recession in 2008. At that point in time, the Railyard Community Corporation came to the city, as I understand it, came to the governing body, said we can't make these lease payments. And so for the next 5 years, the city allowed them to defer $400,000 of contractual lease payment. And so they have a growing deferred liability to the city, and we have a growing deferred revenue from them. They expect to pay that deferred liability. Right now it's about $4.2 million to pay us back in, And I have to read the master lease more carefully because in their program, their schedule of lease payments, their lease payments stop when the 2010 bond is paid off in 2026. And so what they were going to use the lease payments for in 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030 was to pay back that deferred liability to the city. And so there's been a number of amendments to that.
That's why the dip in fiscal year 27 from 1.5 million to 900,000? Or why wouldn't they start paying that debt service back immediately?
Well, again, it's the deferred liability that they start paying back in 2027.
So why the dip in fiscal year 2027?
That I don't know, but these are numbers are provided to me by the Santa Fe Railyard Community Corporation.
They weren't sure why.
It has, I don't know exactly what in the lease, but it's to pay back the deferred liability.
You said those monies came from lease agreements?
They are their primary source of revenue is the ground lease revenue from all the people who have the tenants. And they have, and the leases, all their leases, while they vary final maturities, some are, I think they're all very long-term, over 50 years. But every year, the ground lease is increased by the rate of inflation. And that's built into their contracts.
So it was the Railyard Corporation that provided these? Because I'm wondering just why those numbers aren't a little more consistent throughout, especially since the leases are for more than 20 years.
I can't explain that. I like I say, I need to read the master lease agreement better.
The other thing is, anyone leasing right now or renting the other half of the Market Street condo?
I believe that the escape room is the only new tenant in the other empty part that is subject to the ongoing bankruptcy.
There are people using that.
Yeah, but it didn't work out.
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, there is nobody in the boneyard, if that's the big vacant space that you're talking about?
That's the other side of the city's. Who's using it now? Somebody's using it now.
It's a dance group, a youth dance group that just utilizes it, but there's nobody renting it.
So they're not renting it, leasing it, they're just are on it?
That's correct.
Is there any liability in that? I don't care if they use it, just want
Chairman, Councilor Rivera, actually when Community Services asked me that, I asked them to get a certificate of liability, so they have insurance certificate to us.
Okay. I don't want to mess with the Spanish dancers, so.
Good choice.
Okay, Mayor, go ahead.
I think it's, as we think about our options going forward, and I think that's what this conversation is designed to prepare us for, it's worthwhile to remember that, as you pointed out in passing, in the history of our relationship with the Railyard Corporation, there have been a number of amendments that have been negotiated and agreed to between the two parties. So it's not as if everything that was agreed to initially, go back to what Councilor Villarreal was asking about in terms of the fiscal projections from the beginning, those are not set in concrete. We have just as the unanticipated recession of 07 and 08 had to change the relationship between the city and the Railyard Corporation. Now going forward, we can look at this data, we can look at land use options and talk about amendments to both the plan, potentially, but also the relationship with the Railyard. This is an ongoing activity, and this is designed to give us the basis for that, for any choices we would want to make going forward. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
Thank you.
And one thing I would like to point out, and this goes along to what Ms. McCoy had stated earlier, the Railyard Community Corporation's lease payments to the city from the period 2010 to 2018 is understated by about $800,000 because they net Parcel G, Railyard, or the Market Station condo, and the depot ground lease. So the city owns land or has facilities in the rail yard that we're supposed to pay ground lease revenues or ground lease to the Santa Fe Rail Yard Community Corp. We don't make those payments. While the number itself is fine because we're not recording the expense of the ground lease, nor are we recording the revenue that the Rail Yard Community Corporation would be transferring back to us. So it's another one of those instances where, we have to do a better job accounting for all of the city's expenses and all of the city's revenues.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'd like a motion on the Public Works Department
Well,
budget.
Hold on, though.
Yes.
You said we could only ask questions as to the numbers. And that we'd
Because
be
my
able to-
intent was I wanted to get through the numbers so we could get a motion. If we want to discuss Public Works at the end of the budget hearings, that's why I wanted to go line by the numbers.
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't want to drag this on for,
Well, I have one thing.
okay.
I've been
go ahead.
waiting. And that's what's interesting to me is that I didn't see you pull out anything, and there's a couple line items with regard to solar, but not a whole lot about sustainability. And there must be sustainability investments in these numbers, but it's not obvious other than the couple of solar line items. And so I don't know if
No,
that's
go ahead.
something
I think
you
have an
can
answer
speak
for
to
that.
now, or if you want to send us a memo. I'd just be curious in this budget what we're doing with regard to that.
Thank you for the question, Chairman, Counselor. Yes, it's an underlying theme of everything we do at Public Works, certainly. Our buses run all on CNG. We have entered the first ever energy services contract for the city of Santa Fe, that $5 million with Amoresco, which will replace a bunch of equipment to be much more energy efficient. We're undertaking the solar and lighting project, which we are looking to build to like a $5 million project with the $925,000 of seed funding we received from the state. So we're going through like 40 of our facilities looking for opportunities to replace with high efficiency lighting, as well as putting solar on the facilities. The parking division will be replacing their, and has already begun replacing their lights with LED lights in the parking lots. Director Romero is working on replacing the street lights with LED lights. And we continue, of course, to really work on the bicycle trails network so that we can increase multimodal transit in our town and reduce reliance on carbon-based transportation. We are in discussions with the bike share company that works with Albuquerque to implement a bike share. We're looking at the e-scooters. So quite a bit of sustainability efforts going across the board in everything that we do.
And the Amoresco, I haven't heard, I know that we're doing something with them, but I have not really heard the details on that. Is that something you can tell us about now or later?
Chairman, Councilor, yes, that was approved by Council a few months ago. It's a big part of the GRT bond project. So it'll be the improvements to the Genevieve Chavez Community Center, improvements to Salvador Perez. We're replacing chillers, HVAC, all that kind of thing. So.
I was going to make a motion to approve the Public Works budget. Aye.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, before we go, this was a very large packet to go through, and public utilities is just as large, so I'm not sure how you want to sort of arrange the day for such a large packet, but something to think about.
really, we got to focus on the numbers first. The general discussions regarding policy or programs we don't like or do like. We have a Public Works Committee, we have a Public Utilities Committee, we have a Finance Committee. I'd really like to focus on the numbers as much as possible. And tomorrow we need to finish by 4 or 4:30 because we have a Public Utilities meeting. So, okay, so we are adjourned till 1 o'clock tomorrow. Thank